To make history, Sitharaman to present her 8th consecutive union budget at 11 a.m. this morning.
And union budget expected to shore up weakening economic growth and ease the burden on the middle class.
Will the budget bring in much awaited tax relief? From Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, all eyes on the tax slab structure.
And the opposition Congress to raise inflation, Mahakumbh stampede, Ambedkar's insult during the budget session starting today.
Big setback to the Aam Aadmi Party. 7 MLAs resign just 5 days before voting in the Delhi Assembly elections.
And a truck carrying gas cylinders catches fire in Uttar Pradesh, triggers multiple simultaneous explosions.
A small private plane crashes in Philadelphia in the US. Shortly after takeoff, multiple casualties reported.
And India records its 17th consecutive T20I series victory at home with sensational win in Pune versus England. And you are watching our live and rolling coverage of Budget 2025. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is all set to present the Union Budget for fiscal year 25-26 at about 11 o'clock in Lok Sabha. The Finance Minister will discuss budget allocations, expected revenue in the upcoming year, after which the document will be presented in Rajya Sabha. Now, on January 31st, Sitharaman also presented a member economic survey. She tabled it in the parliament, which projects India's GDP growth to be between 6.3 to 6.8% in financial year 25. Now, the budget is expected to focus more on agriculture, may introduce tax reforms. Those are the big expectations.
Right.
And which will also include, perhaps, Krishna, phasing out the old tax regime.
Yeah, possible, but let's face it, all expectations, all eyes on this budget is about how this budget can provide some relief to the middle class, and that could possibly involve tinkering with the tax slabs, possible increase in exemptions, maybe a cut in income tax rates. We don't know, but there is a possibility about the phasing out of the old tax regime, as Shweta was talking about, and potentially offering zero income tax for those earning less than 10 lakh rupees a year. Bear in mind, the budget session of the parliament began on the 31st of January on Friday with a speech by President Draupadi Murmu. That session is divided into two parts. The first runs from the 31st of January to the 13th of February, and the second will begin on the 10th of March and ends on the 4th of April. But Shweta, all eyes on today. This budget, so many expectations, and that's the reason why we have a day-long non-stop coverage with some of the best minds who can break down the budget for us, isn't it, Shweta?
All right, and with that, let's also quickly introduce our panel of guests sitting here right in the studios. Karthik Malhotra, R. Sridharan, Barnik Chitran Moitro. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's kick off this budget coverage. And I want to come to you with the most basic question first, and that is what's weighing in on the minds of people, the common man, the middle class. Karthik, beginning with you, your big expectations from the budget. What are you hoping Nirmala Sitharaman will do? This is not going to be a magic bullet. This is going to be a long
Although we're calling our coverage.
Although we're calling it magic bullet.
This is why not? Why do you think it won't be? For all you know, it might just be a magic bullet for the middle class. Honestly, there's a difference between expectations, what you practically expect, and then there's a wish list, right? So I would tend to veer a little in the direction of a wish list, and the wish list would be that you need consumption to take off again, and for consumption to happen, people need more money. It is as simple as that. Now, how will they get more money? Either the government can continue with social sector schemes and provide the rural economy with more money in their hands and for the consumption to take off, or think about us tax-paying urban middle class, middle income people and give us some leeway by way of taxes. But I think this time around, the finance minister will find it a little difficult. It's going to be a tightrope walk, balancing GDP growth, which has been faltering, and managing the fiscal deficit, because for the fiscal deficit, you want to collect more taxes. If you want to collect more taxes, how do you give tax ops?
Right, you have to collect more taxes at the same time. Find ways to lessen the tax burden on the middle class. Shri, I mean, for once, this budget seems to have a very singular focus. All eyes, the salaried people from across India are waiting with bated breath for this budget, isn't it? Because of the talk and social media, you keep listening to about the tax burden, the rising tax burden, and the fact that all of that has resulted in a slowdown of a so-called slowdown of India's GDP rate. It's not at the rates at which it used to be before, and a further slowdown possible in the future. So one is cutting income tax, the other is boosting growth.
So for precisely that reason, Krishna, that you talk about what is to come. So the finance minister is obviously going to present a budget that looks at the external scenario, the fight that's going to happen between the two big giants, global giants, a $30 trillion economy, which is the US, and almost a $20 trillion economy, which is the China. So now, if these two giants are going to be clashing, and there will be collateral damages to economies like us. So I think as these two people throw punches, the finance minister will want to make sure that how does a country like India, even if we take one which is like not aimed at us, but it comes our way, how do we still stand up and like stay on the ground? Yeah. So I think that's the macroeconomic strategy that she'll be working out, largely to make sure that as we get into a very uncertain era going ahead, both in terms of tariff, in terms of slowdown, in terms of what the survey also talks about, a fractional economic scenario where walls are going up, countries are starting to look inwards. In that, when the efficiency goes down in the global economy, how does India, keep its growth trajectory still going? So I think those will be some of the key concerns that she'll look at. It'll be nice if, like Karthik said, there is something which is given to the middle class. But I guess if I were the FM, I'd probably err on the side of caution and keep my powder dry for a bigger battle to come rather than expend it at this time.
A bigger battle to come, and that is what we are all expecting and hoping India will be able to stay away from. In fact, the economic survey also points out, as well as the chief economic advisor, Barnik, that this could be an opportunity for India if we were to leverage it in the right ways. Now, on the backdrop of all the geopolitical tensions, the trade war, which is starting today, 1st of Feb, between US, Mexico, what is your big expectation from the budget? How can India avoid falling in the trap of this global, economic slowdown, the trade war that is likely to unfold starting today?
So I think the trade war creates unique opportunities for India. I think we've heard all about the China +1 thesis. It's a big thesis which investors are playing out. I think the opportunity missed over the past 5 years is India has managed to get barely 15%. Some experts argue it may be as low as 10% of all manufacturing which has moved out from China. In fact, if you look at a decadal view of manufacturing, the share of manufacturing in our GDP is probably a percentage lower than before this government came to power 11 years back. So there is a big, I would say, future opportunity for us to use this budget to create the right environment to create jobs. Only if you create jobs and income will the consumption crisis go. I think a middle income tax cut is only a bandage on the wound. It's not going to solve the problem.
Okay, income tax cut is just a bandage on the wound. Let's then take it across to the person who's possibly, preparing that bandage, Nirmala Sitharaman. We have our correspondent standing right outside the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's residence. We have Yash joining us live from over there. Yash, talk to us. What is the mood like over there? Lots of media presence. I can see everybody is waiting for when Nirmala Sitharaman, our Finance Minister, will leave her home premises to come and present the Union Budget, her 8th consecutive.
Well, absolutely, Krishna. In fact, you can see behind me the kind of media presence over there, and all are waiting for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to actually leave her residence, which is the 15th Safdarjung Road here in the national capital. I'll just give you a quick rundown exactly what happens before the union budget is presented before the parliament. Well, first she'll leave from her residence and then she'll go towards the North Block. There will be a photo op there, and after that photo op, she will be going to the President for a customary go-ahead for the union budget, and in fact then she'll reach the Parliament premises. There also we'll see a photo op there, and then at around 11 a.m. is the time when the union budget 2025 will be presented. So it's a hectic day for the Finance Minister today, and all eyes will be on her. Interestingly, this time around, one thing I would like to point out that I think it's never happened that a union budget is being presented so close to any elections, and perhaps though the Election Commission has made it very clear that no announcement, no Delhi-specific announcement could be made due to the moral code of conduct. So perhaps what we are eyeing this time around is that, in fact, if you talk to any person, any commoner, what they say is that they only care about two things. The number one is the tax cut, and the second is about the long-term capital gains tax or the short-term capital gains tax. So we have to look onto that aspect, exactly what transpires for the middle class, because the middle class have been waiting for a very long time for a relief from the union government, and let's see how things pan out. But around 8:45 is the time when we are expecting Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to leave her residence.
8:45 is the time when Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be leaving her residence. So we're literally counting down to all these things.
Just about half an hour from now.
Yes, and also all eyes will be on the document she's carrying and the casing of the document, the Bahi Khata, as it's called. And every time she's presented the budget, Shweta, there's been all eyes on what is that document, how is it presented, isn't it?
Absolutely, how it's presented, what she's wearing, which state garments is she representing this time. What is she invoking at the beginning of her budget, beginning with poets and people who are really responsible for the cultural heritage of this country. She usually begins with evoking one or the other, mostly from down south, which is where her cultural heritage,
Tamil language,
in her Tamil language. Absolutely, I think all eyes will be on that as well, but that will come at 11 o'clock. Let's quickly also get in Dr. Srinath Sridharan. He's a policy researcher joining us live on the show. Dr. Srinath, thank you for taking time out. It's a day the middle class has been waiting for a very long time. Conversation in the past couple of days and weeks up to budget have primarily been around what's in it for the middle class. Who are the middle class? I think, a broad definition of people earning anywhere between 6 to 36 lakh rupees as of today comprises of this middle class, and they have hopes, they have expectations on what can the budget deliver.
Shweta, one thing we will have to understand is the estimates of middle class range anywhere from 12 crore Indians to 50 crore Indians. And let's keep one thing very clear, that we don't have the census data after 2011. So if you look at, let's say, the National Housing Bank, the housing regulator, Noida, Gurgaon and Navi Mumbai still are rural areas. So a lot of these reclassification and actually knowing the estimates of who are the middle class, today we are using only surrogate estimates. So that's the problem.
Srinath, before you go any further, let's just clarify that according to as of the last census, Noida and Gurgaon are not considered as urban centers?
Navi Mumbai.
They are actually rural. So the housing finance sector, when they actually lend to buildings in those areas, including Navi Mumbai, lots of parts of Navi Mumbai are rural. So unless we actually have a number of actual data, we think that we are the data and the digital pipeline capital of the world, and yet we don't have the basic one. So I think one of the announcements I am keenly looking forward this calendar year from the government is announcing census date. Without all those, we are only estimating, right? For example, Nielsen comes with its own estimates of how many middle class we have, and then in a slowing economy, Nestle and Hindustan Lever get up and say, hey, we have a problem, and there's a slowdown. So I think, which is what I wrote for News9 yesterday, this particular, somehow the run-up to this budget seems to be the biggest archaeological discovery of a category called middle class. And that is where my, why? Why are we making this? Middle class has existed in India for all these years, and they are one of the, I think, the sincere taxpayers across all kinds of tax categories. The personal income tax in India has overshot corporate income tax collections for the last 2 years running. And that's a worry, because 2016, when corporate tax was cut, it was in anticipation of private capex coming in, and it has not happened at all. So what lever or the financial tool will the finance minister use today to use, let's say, the carrot and stick for corporate India? We are jumping too much on middle class. The tax is only one part of it. But if private capex doesn't come in, I think jobs won't get created. I think it's unnecessary distraction of whether we will have sweet popcorn or sugar popcorn being taxed higher and all that. I think just distraction.
I mean, it makes for an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it does. But for the GST Council meeting, for sure. But we are here, discussing the budget and wondering where, it's a good point that he's making. It's the archaeological discovery of the middle class. Suddenly, the focus seems to be on it because, the data tells you personal income tax has shot above corporate income tax in the last 2 years. But as we discuss the possibility of an income tax rate cut, the other big focus of the budget is going to be job creation. What kind of, capital expenditure is going to go into the creation of jobs, isn't it, Barnik?
So I think one of the biggest assumptions of previous budgets have been that public expenditure will crowd in private expenditure. That has not happened. So I think if you have to create jobs, a new approach is needed. If you talk to investors, one of the biggest risks they talk about India is the possibility of returns which are actually risk adjusted, and that's a big concern. So it's a lot of measures around ease of doing business, looking at tariffs, looking at import duties, looking at the currency. I think India has artificially propped up its currency over the last 2-3 years, and we are seeing the slide right now. So there's a general concern about competitiveness of the economy, and I would keep a strong eye out on what policy measures are being announced to make Indian industry competitive again, which will only crowd in more private investment.
So that's a very interesting point because, if you read the economic survey in detail, there's an entire chapter 5 which is devoted to this whole concept of deregulation. It says, how can we make the private individuals and businesses far more efficient? How can we deshackle them in some sense in terms of cumbersome compliances, onerous regulatory requirements and everything? And it also talks about like the middle the midterm strategy for India, how it needs to center around this whole efficiency to facilitate greater investment. It talks about efficiency of capital. So it talks in terms of how, we must focus on investment starting to generate returns early on, because now that's one of the big challenges that we have in terms of red tape and slowdowns. That's number one. And second, it talks about, how do we focus on getting more output per unit of investment. So I think if that were a clue, Krishna and Shweta, I think the finance minister will probably focus a whole lot on that in this budget, and maybe subsequently as well. We may hear a lot on this front because it's very clearly been identified as a critical strategy of our near-term growth for India.
Ease of doing business 2.0.
Efficiency,
but
everything.
again, I want to bring in some data from the economic survey, and in fact, Shweta, if you remember, we were discussing it just some time back, and this is about the slowdown in FDI coming into India. So I think the economic survey has done a good job in really calling out the elephant in the room, which happens to be regulation, and telling the elephant to move out of the way. It's saying get out of the way of businesses and let them focus on their core mission. And what is their core mission? Their core mission is doing business. Now, FDI inflow for the April to November period in this financial year, and I'm talking about just April to November, which is 8 months, give or take, of the financial year, there has been just $500 million worth of FDI inflow. This compared to $8.5 billion in the same period last year. And when you talk about the repatriation of FDI, which is money going out of the country or investments going out or dividends or profits from those investments going out, that number has also been growing year on year. So I think deregulation...
I think that particular period, I think Hyundai IPO is to blame. Because
sure, but you're talking about what, 25,000 crore rupees worth of repatriation with the Hyundai IPO. You're talking about an $8.5 billion repatriation happening. In fact, almost 19.8 billion was the repatriation amount in FY23. So we're talking about money not just slowing down and coming into India, but also going out of India. So flight of capital is something that must be addressed. And the question I have really is that if India is not the country to invest in right now, where give or take you're still looking at a 6.4, 6.5% growth rate, and you're looking at a fairly vibrant consumer market, then where is this money going? Is all the hedge being made against, let's say, the US dollar or gold, or what are we really looking at? If India is not the destination to invest right now, where is this money going?
So on repatriation, I just want to add one small point, which is that, while it does hurt us, it's not necessarily a bad thing at all, because if investors don't have the comfort of knowing that I can repatriate my earnings or my dividends, then there'll be no investment to begin with. So I think that's an essential part of a free global trade, where people feel confident about putting money here, so knowing that I can take it out one day when I want to. I think that comfort must exist. So if there's anyone who's thinking of putting any kind of caps on repatriation of money, that's a terrible idea.
In terms of why is India not attracting investment, I have a sincere belief that if this economy grows at only 6.5% per annum, it is not attractive to any investor on a risk-adjusted basis. For an investor to consider India, India has to grow at minimum 8 to 8.5%. We need to have a far lower interest rate regime. A higher interest rate regime actually crowds out FDI. And if you look at the strength of the dollar, it is far safer for global investors to park their money in US Treasury than consider India. In US Treasury, long-term rates are hovering close to 5%, which is the ideal risk-free rate for a global investor. If you add India's risk premium and everything, investors expect at least 12 to 14% equity return. Where is that return if your economy is only growing at 6.5%?
Fair point. In fact, staying on with the returns and the macros as far as what's emerging from the economic survey, Karthik, coming back to you, projections for financial year 25 is anywhere between 6.3 to 6.8%. The economic survey also points out that despite all the challenges, macros remain stable. What are you making of the macroeconomic situation? Have we moved away from the growth rates of financial year 24, far away for investors to be cautious right now? Because they are pulling back money, whether we like it or not.
Right. So I think, let's look at data in the context of the post-COVID recovery that India saw. So those, the 9.2% also that we saw in one quarter and the annualized 8.2% that we saw for FY24. I mean, these numbers were coming on the back of the year 2021 being a real letdown. So any growth year on year on that, averaging out itself and eventually on a low base registering growth is obviously an easier task. Now, I was speaking to Dr. Arvind Virmani yesterday, in fact, on the channel, and I asked him the same question. That is 6.3 to 6.8 a good enough growth rate for India to become Viksit Bharat by 2047, as Prime Minister has been talking about? He's saying as long as we are able to grow in real terms at 8% per annum, we are okay on standard of living going up and breaking out of the middle income trap. Now, definition of Viksit Bharat can vary from, the size of the economy to the per capita GDP income, to the per capita income, to however you want to define it, right? I mean, I don't think it really has, Viksit Bharat does not have a definition in economics. But he's saying as long as you're in real terms able to grow at 8% or so, you're all right.
Live shots coming in there from North Block as we speak. Nirmala Sitharaman is expected to leave her residence very, very shortly, in about 15 minutes from now, Krishna. Yeah. And that's where she'll enter first for a photo op before heading to the parliament. Yeah, we're literally bringing you the so-called ball-by-ball coverage of this budget. First, we showed you where it's going to begin. It's going to begin at Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's residence, and from there it will move to the Ministry of Finance, and eventually in the parliament is where the budget will be presented. And we here at News9 are going to bring you every single detail of budget 2025, the analysis, the details right here. We have a very special lineup of guests all day long here, don't we, Shweta? Let's take this back to Srinath as well, who's with us. Srinath, one is, let's put it on the table over here. Three big expectations, if I were to ask. One is, of course, income tax, what's going to happen with it. Two is creation of jobs. And three is, this whole talk of deregulation and, getting out of the way so that growth can take prominence. So these three will be, say, top of mind as far as this budget 2025 is concerned. More importantly, how do you do that? Because there are words like, how do you unleash the animal spirits as far as the private sector is concerned? Because private sector, it's been said that they have a responsibility in nation building, in driving the growth of this country. But it's not going to come that easily. You have to send strong signals from the government.
Krishna, I think deregulation is a larger topic, and I think we should keep it outside the ambit of the union budget. Deregulation would involve, I think, to me, one of the topics which none of us have actually touched so far is administrative reforms. Unless we do that, and if you remember in the last 40 years, we've had two commissions, reform commissions, who have gone through volumes of data. 17,000 pages of reports and recommendations are available, and we have not done anything to it in the last 40 years. So unless we actually do administrative reforms of bringing accountability of what should we expect from a bureaucrat, and what is their role, responsibility, and what is the recourse for a citizen, you can't really do deregulation. We still haven't solved for, in the three-layer governance that we have, the federal, the state, and the municipal, we still haven't devolved financial authority to a lot more municipal units. And unless we do that, your municipalities are going to depend on the state capital for any budgetary allocation, which is why they will not become self-sufficient in ability to raise municipal bonds. We've had only 12 municipal bonds raised. I think less than 2,000 crores have been raised. So unless we have some of these financial autonomy, a lot of these conversations about deregulation, nothing is going to change. We still believe that ease of doing business India is far better just because we have improved 10 positions in the global survey. I think we'll have to become serious about this. We measure outcomes, but we don't measure impact. I think that's the largest challenge, Krishna. So just to step back, I think middle class conversations about probably corporate tax and some tax breaks are all fine. But I think the deregulation is a longer conversation. And I hope that the parliament will have some sense of accountability to actually debate some of these and not just push through bills or the opposition coming and screaming and getting things out. I just want to bring a point, another point for debate with the larger panelists here. I think we have the Finance Commission, which was formed last year with an agenda. And I think it is going to become more challenging to hear what they have to say, considering that the state level debt has been increasing in the last 10 years and states are not necessarily becoming competent. 8 out of 8 states in India have alcohol-based revenues in the top 4 revenue kitty. I mean, that says something, right? I mean, the states are not building competitiveness. How do we get states to actually develop those competitiveness? Otherwise, you can do whatever you want at the federal side, but unless the states actually make ease of doing business, nothing will happen.
Ease of doing business, Shweta.
And you talked about liquor policy, and I don't even want to go where it brought the Delhi government, what it brought the Delhi government, but let's talk about deregulation. Shri, I want to come to you first. Deregulation, cutting down of red tapeism, that was the promise on which Narendra Modi first came to power in 2014. We've seen a lot of measures, a single window clearance, hoping to make clusters within India, which will be beneficial for companies to set shop, despite which the numbers are suggesting that there is more repatriation of FDI than ever before, at least the ongoing financial year is concerned. What exactly is deregulation? Because the government has not been able to reform a lot of sectors, land, farm, labor. Farm especially, there was an entire fiasco there where the government had to really roll back on the 3 farm laws. There is very little room or absolutely nothing we have seen on reforms, at least so far.
So I think you asked me what is deregulation. I think the answer came from Prime Minister himself, who talks about minimum government, maximum governance. So that has to be the spirit with which the government needs to address industry and investment. You don't get into the hairs of industry unnecessarily. You try and make things simple for them. If you're talking about creating zones where industry can set up units for manufacturing, you have to make sure that these are literally plug and play. And you also ring fence them in terms of taxation and even power supply, water supply, transport, everything. So it has to be an entire package, just the way China did it. Now today, if China is, China dominates world manufacturing. China as one country makes much more than US and EU put together and everyone else put together. So that is the power of China in manufacturing. How did they do it? They did it exactly by, making pockets where these excellent manufacturing units could come up at scale. One of the problems in India is that we don't have manufacturing at scale. If Walmart today wanted to buy, let's say, just toys from India, who do you go to? There is not one company which can give you, let's say, 20 trucks of one particular toy, right? So scale is an issue, and scale remains an issue because we have not created these, islands of manufacturing which are competitive globally.
And yes, please.
Please go ahead.
Karthik, how do we then really come to creating an economy of scales in India? Are we in any position to rival Chinese manufacturing? And the focus, of course, will also be on manufacturing, onshoring, given what's happening, worldwide.
Right. I'll come to that in just a second. But, you're talking about reforms and this government came with the promise of reform. What is the single biggest reform that this NDA government in the last 10.5 years has arguably brought about? I think the biggest reform is GST.
And
look at
IBC?
the complexity in GST. Look at the complexity in GST. Look at the notices being sent to company after company, crores of thousands of crores of GST notices, where there still happens to be confusion on what input credit you get on which items, which component goes at what GST, final product, the inverted duty structure for EVs, popcorn. I mean, you were talking about popcorn sometime back.
Cream bun.
Yeah, I mean, the popcorn, cream bun, I think
Sweet versus savory.
7 years or so on, we are still not able to really rationalize GST rates.
Forget
So
about
why
ease of
the
doing
idea of-
business. Ease of paying tax is not
So
there.
I think GST has actually added to complexity of doing business and complexity of paying taxes, and GST is not alone, even for the middle class, and we keep coming back to that because we're hoping there's a magic bullet somewhere in there for the middle class. But even for us to choose between the old tax regime and the new tax regime, the CA has to do the laborious job of calculating your tax on both those slabs and then telling you, hey, you're better off forgetting about the investments you've made all these years and going with the new tax regime, or hey, why don't you invest a little more in the ATC and section 88 and ATD and get some rebate, and you're better off filing it in the old tax regime. So I think overall it's not just complexity for businesses to operate. I think there needs to be more ease of living and more ease of just operating in this country through all these bureaucratic hurdles and complex tax structures. And I believe tax rationalization and some simplicity in the tax regime has to happen. Now to your question on how India will get there when it comes to competing with China on manufacturing. Honestly, I don't see that happening. Definitely not for a decade or so. And I think for India to become competitive with China, China will really have to do something wrong. I don't think we are on the trajectory to really fundamentally competing with China, either on cost or now even on quality. At some point of time, 20 years or so ago, we used to talk about cheap
Quality
Chinese
was
products.
an
We used to
impediment,
talk about,
yes.
you know, plastic, cheap plastic coming from China. That's not the case anymore. China is making pretty much everything, you know, from plushy toys to apparel, garments to electric
Deep
vehicles to now deep sea. Right. So, in fact, on News9 Plus, we had done the story on the toys industry. That's the example that she was giving some time back, that, you know, Noida has a toy city. Greater Noida has a toy city. Just go to any of those factories and compare the quality of a made in India toy versus anything that you pick up, let's say from a Miniso, which is made in China, and compare the difference. Now, what we've also done wrong, I don't know, Barnik, if you'll agree with me on this or not, I think what we've also done wrong is that when we attract FDI into the country, we have this indigenization clause attached to it. In 3 years, 30% of whatever you procure has to be from India, in 5 years, 50%, and so on, right? Now, what that does is overall, it messes around with the quality of experience that these stores tend to offer you. So, you know, if you go to any of these shops that were set up in India in the last 7-8 years, I don't want to name brands, but you'll see a marked difference between what you bought from them 5 years ago and what you buy from them today. Because anything that is made in India, from toys to apparel to garments, it just doesn't last as well as the Chinese version of that lasted 5 years ago.
But then how do you really ensure that these brands continue to make in India if they are not to procure from India? And how do you then put in place the supply chains which have been missing? Because it's very
I think
easy
it boils
at this
down
point in time to bring that, you know, low cost input from other countries surrounding India, especially China, and then assemble in India. So India wanting to get away from just being an assembly line to making here in India. How do we really do that?
So I think it's a function of scale. If you want to compete with China on cost alone, without looking at economies of scale kicking in, it's going to be difficult. So for economies of scale to kick in, you will need a lot of investments. You will need to skill your manpower. You will have to ensure that you're importing your raw material or procuring the raw material from the best places possible. You'll need the right machinery. You'll need those clusters of innovation and clusters of manufacturing to come in, and which is where I think the government's infrastructure spend should come in. And only once you have orders of that scale, and you also have rejections because your quality is just not good enough, and it's not just a price competition that you're running with China, that is when it'll come in. But like I said, I don't see a roadmap to that. I don't see these industry clusters coming up. I mean, we talk about Dholera and we talk about Sanand and we talk about, you know, a few other little clusters where either automobile production or semiconductor production is likely to happen at scale, and there's a lot of private sector investment going in. But I mean, guess what is the size of semiconductors that we will be producing for the foreseeable future? 40 mm, 48 nm
You've gone from-
nanometers, right? And the world is right now operating at what, 8 nm?
Yeah.
6, 8
So
6
how do you
nm.
get there? I don't see a roadmap for that.
Well, everything from, the toys that you're talking about, making sure there's more money in the hands of the middle class to go out and buy those toys, to ensuring that most of those toys get made over here. All expectations are on the budget and what the budget can do. 8th budget for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Let's get a quick recap of all the previous 7 budgets. Take a look at this.
The direct tax revenue has significantly increased over the past couple of years. It is now growing at double-digit rate every year. Under the new regime, sir, an individual shall be required to pay tax at the reduced rate of 10%. I therefore propose to reduce this time limit for reopening of assessments to 3 years from the present 6 years. I am proposing a new provision permitting taxpayers to file an updated return on payment of additional tax. This updated return can be filed within 2 years. I propose to reduce the number of basic customs duty rates on goods other than textiles and agriculture from 21 to 13. I am now announcing a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act 1961. The purpose is to make the Act concise, lucid, easy to read and understand. We need to invest heavily in infrastructure, in digital economy, and on job creation. The ambitious program of Bharatmala would help develop national road corridors and highways, while Sagarmala would enhance port connectivity. Railway infrastructure would need an investment of 50 lakh crores. We shall aim to improve physical quality of life through national infrastructure pipeline. The investment on health infrastructure in this budget has increased substantially. The national infrastructure pipeline was launched with 6,835 projects. The project pipeline has now expanded to 7,400 projects. The approach is driven by 7 engines, namely roads, railways, airports, ports, mass transport, waterways, and logistics infrastructure. Data centers and energy storage systems, including dense charging infrastructure and grid-scale battery systems, will be included in the harmonized list of infrastructure. The capital investment outlay is being increased steeply for the 3rd year in a row. We will endeavor to maintain strong fiscal support for infrastructure over the next 5 years. Investment in infrastructure by private sector will be promoted through viability gap funding. Daring through cooperatives shall also be encouraged. We also hope to form 10,000 new farmer-producer organizations. Our government is committed to the goal of doubling farmers' incomes by 2022. Use of Kisan drones will be promoted for crop assessment, digitization of land records, spraying of insecticides and nutrients. States will be encouraged to revise syllabi of agricultural universities to meet the needs of natural, zero budget, and organic farming. Digital public infrastructure for agriculture will be built as an open source, open standard, and interoperable public good. An agriculture accelerator fund will be set up to encourage agri-startups. New 109 high-yielding and climate-resilient varieties of 32 field and horticultural crops will be released for cultivation. The government enables about 10 million youth to take up industry-relevant skill training through the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. To prepare our youth to also take up jobs overseas, we will increase focus on skill sets needed abroad. We will also lay focus on new age skills like artificial intelligence to facilitate transfer of Japanese industrial and vocational skills, techniques and knowledge. We will take forward this initiative with many more countries. The government proposes to amend the Apprenticeship Act with a view to further enhancing apprenticeship opportunities for our youth. The National Skill Qualification Framework will be aligned with dynamic industry needs. 30 Skill India International Centers will be set up across different states. The digital ecosystem for skilling will be further expanded with the launch of a unified Skill India digital platform. 20 lakh youth will be skilled over a 5-year period. The model skill loan scheme will be revised to facilitate loans up to 7.5 lakh rupees with a guarantee from a government-promoted fund. Our government will launch a comprehensive scheme for providing internship in 500 top companies to 1 crore youth. They will gain exposure for 12 months to real-life business environment.
Associate sponsor, New Virtus GT line, style to wander.
ये बड़ा होके मम्मी का, पापा का, दादू का सबका ध्यान रखेगा।
रिटायरमेंट के बाद किसी पे बोझ ना बनने का परफेक्ट प्लान। कैनरा HSBC लाइफ इंश्योरेंस रिटायरमेंट प्लान। कैनरा HSBC लाइफ इंश्योरेंस, प्रॉमिसेस का पार्टनर।
Your promise is IGI certified. Your ambition is IGI certified. 14-step grading process. 50 years of trust. IGI Trust Certified.
You are watching the non-stop coverage of Budget 2025 here on News 9.
And through the day today, starting 8 a.m. in the morning, we'll be bringing you everything that you can expect from the Budget 2025. In just about a couple of minutes from now, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be leaving her official residence. She'll be making her way to the Finance Ministry in North Block. There will be a photo op, post which she will be entering Parliament at about 11 o'clock is when the budget speech will finally commence. The wait is over. 8th consecutive budget by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, making history as far as Finance Ministers is concerned, and the only woman Finance Minister to present as many as 8 budgets, Krishna.
Absolutely. And visuals on your screens are of the residence of Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in capital New Delhi, 15 Safdarjung Road. Those are the visuals. She's just about to leave, as Shweta was talking about. But even as she leaves for the Finance Ministry and eventually gets to the Parliament to present the budget, we here are bringing to you all the expectations, all the possibilities in front of us, really, when it comes to this all-important budget. We've been discussing everything from a possible cut in income tax rates, possible announcements for deregulation of India's private sector, to investments to create jobs. The question is, as we're asking, magic bullet. Will there be a magic bullet for the middle class? But even as we discuss that, let me bring in Srinath. Srinath, we also need to ponder over this question of the poverty line, as it were, in India. You know, poverty line that we have currently is a good 15 years old nearly. Doesn't really tell you the picture of, where exactly does the poverty line lies in India in 2025. Please unmute yourself.
Yes. That's a very valid point. I think the political system has surrogate measures of figuring it out. The reality is, if we are having free grain distribution scheme, then there is something going on, right? I mean, data or not. So the political system knows it, but we don't have data for much of things that we do. As I said earlier, we have to measure impact and not outcomes. We are measuring outcomes and feeling very, very nice about it. Some of the populist measures that not only the state government, including the central government, have started where is it going to lead? And for a minute, I'm all for supporting anywhere there a humanitarian need is involved. But we also have to be pragmatic. How do we actually help? We have 2/3 of Indians less than 35 years of age, and they are the median age for being the productive labor. The International Labour Organization speaks about the age 15 to 65 being productive labor. So how do we equip them? So coming back to the poverty line,
I'm just going to ask you to pause for a bit. We're getting you live visuals of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman entering the Finance Ministry building in North Block. So the preparations have officially begun for the presentation. I'm sure the preparations have been going on for the last many weeks, but the process has kicked off with the arrival of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman at the North Block and in the Finance Ministry. Srinath, please go ahead.
So coming back, I think the reality is how do we improve skills and jobs? We have said that we have pulled about 40 crore Indians out of poverty line is what the political narrative has been, and we'll have to substantiate it with data. Once they moved out, what do we do? And in real economy, I think I want to go back to the economic survey where it kind of alluded to conversations about the middle class, and even if the growth rate were not at 8% as the market expects, we would still be comfortable during Viksit Bharat. But the reality is, even today, if you look at the global pecking order, we are actually a lower middle income country. We are not even a middle income country. And I think that's where we'll have to bring back policy conversation. India cannot be seeing itself in isolation. I mean, that's a delusion. We'll have to compare ourselves with the rest of the world, because the quality, I think Krishna and Shweta made this point, right? The quality of life, what do we give?
Quality of life.
Very, very important.
Quality of life is going to depend upon two things. One is definitely the availability of jobs, and two is the availability of greater disposable income, isn't it, Shweta?
Absolutely. And in fact, on that, let's talk a little bit more about quality of life, Karthik. Per capita income in India hasn't really kept pace with what we were hoping as of this year. A variety of factors, going in there. But as far as alluding to Srinath's point of whether India is a middle income country or a lower middle income country, where do we currently stand? What are the numbers suggesting? Are we getting there on one hand we talk about middle class, a ballooning middle class which needs to be catered to? The lower income groups, the definition is as bad as about 15 years ago, and things have changed quite dramatically on ground since then.
Right. So if you talk about per capita income, and if you look at the last estimates, I think were about $2,400 or $2,700 per capita per annum, right? Per person per annum. The difficulty of a dollar denomination is that even if you were to, in rupee terms, break out of that mold and increase it with the rupee depreciating against the dollar, you come back to square one. And that has been the story in the last few months at least. But I think to the larger point that we were trying to make earlier, the definition of the poverty line is about 16 years old. 2009 is when the Suresh Tendulkar committee had defined this, this poverty line. And the numbers are fairly obsolete, as they should be with numbers of 16 years ago, which said that for rural India, expenditure, right? This is not income. Expenditure of 27 rupees per day or below defines poverty. In urban areas, expenditure of 33 rupees or less defines poverty, right? Now, what does 27 rupees in rural India or 33 rupees in urban India get you today?
Not even an auto ride.
If I am spending more than 33 rupees today in the national capital,
you're not poor.
I'm not poor.
You're not poor. Right. So my point is, in the last 16 years, somebody who was spending maybe 32 rupees a day in urban India was poor, and today if that person is spending 34 rupees a day, that person is not poor. But look at the inflation in the last 16 years. Right. So when we say and when we make these claims, Srinath was talking about 40 crore people taken out of poverty. Yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, just ahead of the presentation of the economic survey, the President of India, Honorable President of India, had also said, maybe quoting the same data, that 25 crore people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years. Now, this lifting of 25 crore people on data which is 16 years old, and we continue to subsidize and give free ration to 80 crore Indians, is obviously a much larger story to tell. And I'm not sure if we've done enough to lift people out of poverty if we still have to subsidize them the way we continue to do.
And if I might add, even if you take those numbers of lifting people out of poverty, what is ballooning is a ballooning lower middle class. even in the chunk of the middle class that
You're right.
exist.
Look at the nil taxpayers. From the 7.5 crore odd people, 7.32 crore people who pay taxes every year, the number of folks who file nil taxes, which means under the new tax regime, their income is 7 lakh rupees per annum or below. That number is a staggering 60% or so. So the heavy lifting, the heavy lifting on personal direct taxes is being done by just 40% of the taxpayers from the overall very, very abysmally low number of 7.3 crore Indians out of population of 140 crore Indians who pay taxes.
All right. And, let's not talk about global surveys here, Barnik, Shri. Let's talk about what's really happening by the way of numbers. We're talking about an obsolete, figure which was put in place in 2007 or 9, if I'm not wrong, the Tendulkar
2011, 12 by Dr. Suresh Tendulkar. He had drawn the poverty line.
And we are still, talking about that poverty line every time we come out with figures and numbers to suggest the number of people who've been lifted out of poverty. 25 crore people, if they're able to spend 33 rupees or more in urban area and more than 27 rupees in rural area, they're still considered to be above that poverty line. I think those numbers are obsolete today.
Yes, for the simple reason that Karthik talked about, which is inflation, because inflation has gone up over the last 10, 15 years, and we have not factored for that in terms of the poverty line determination. But the point that you talked about, whether India will remain a lower middle income country, see, statistically and arithmetically, if you have 1.4 billion people, and if you need to hit $15,000 per capita income, then we are talking about an economy which is like, you can do the multiplication, 1.4 into 15,000. It's about 15,000 into 0.4, 30 trillion economy. So which is the aspiration. But,
it is 6 times that economy.
Yeah, but what is the sort of growth that you're going to need to hit that 30 trillion, target? 8% minimum, right? So is that possible? So I think it's safe to say that for a long time to come, we'll probably remain a low middle income country with aspirations of moving up the ladder in terms of income. But that said, given that we are 1.4 billion people, every time we move a chunk of people, let's say 25 crore or in the absence of any better metric, let's say we move another 25 crore out of poverty similarly over the next 10, 15 years, that's a whole lot of people coming into the consumption category. So that gives you a lot of strength, and that's what makes India also an attractive market for global companies. That's the hope, because you don't have any other market that is so significant, which is so big, where you can come in and start supplying your goods and services to such a mass population. So that is a hope that we will grow. But will we emerge and become a high income country? I don't think that's going to happen in a hurry.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, let me make a couple of points. I think we unfortunately live in an era of being too generous with ourselves. I think our per capita income classifies us as a low income country. Let's not pat ourselves by calling us a low middle, upper middle, lower middle. I think the challenge of becoming a middle income country, forget about being a developed nation, is that we have to get to a per capita income of $15,000 per capita. At 2,500, which is the rough number we are at today, our per capita income every year has to grow by 8.5% to get to 15,000 for 2047. If the per capita income has to grow at 8.5%, the economy has to grow in real terms nearly close to 9.5 to 10%. So getting to a developed or even a middle income country by 2047 is quite hard. Now
just one clarification. So 9.5% in real terms.
Real terms.
So if inflation happens to, let's say, stabilize at about 4%, you're still looking at a growth rate of about 5%, which on nominal terms we would be able to achieve.
Inflation is added on top.
Right.
So without inflation, we have to go at 9.5%. Plus inflation nominal has to be 13, 14.
That's the real rate of growth.
And real, right? So it's a very, to use a cricketing analogy, it's a very stiff target and a high run rate, right? So,
and a sticky wicket.
So with estimates coming in at 6.3 to 6.8% for next year, and no surety of whether that number is going to go up or go down, we are what, at 50% of our target?
We will get to 8,000 to 9,000 per capita income in 2047, which by the 2047 yardstick will still likely to be a low middle income countries, right? So again, it's a very stiff run rate. I think we have to get practical about what we can do.
It's just a function of the population. It's just simple arithmetic.
Just a clarification, nominal about 12 to 13%, which is
nominal
currently about
14% plus. We have to grow nominally around 15%.
Currently it's about 8.5
Nominally
to 9%.
we are growing at around 9% now,
9%,
9.5 to 10%.
Srinath, all of these numbers, will largely depend upon the inflation rate, and there has been major scares on that front. Yes, we've brought down inflation from 5.4% to 4.9%, but food inflation continues to be at 6.5% in the current financial year in the first 9 months. And food inflation is something that very little that can be done about, apart from setting up supply chains for the long term so that food inflation can be kept under check. How do we manage this inflation versus growth, and more importantly, what can the budget do?
I think, Krishna, we're forgetting that one thing is real, unlike President Trump not believing in climate change. So our agri supply, if you look at it, what they say from farm to plate, nearly 42% of produce is actually wasted, which means there's a large inefficiency in agriculture distribution. That's one which you can fix by, if you said food supply chain and cold chain. And I must be a little cynical here. For the last 20 years, I've heard that we are setting up full cold chains and food processing. Some of the food processing units which are set up in remote locations don't even have proper roads that connect them from that go down to the state highway. So what are we talking about? That's one. Two, I think the entire narrative about climate financing. I remember last year in the union budget, we spoke about climate taxonomy. We still haven't seen sight of it at all. So some of those urgent measures around climate and how it is going to impact our agriculture, if we don't fix it urgently, I think the food inflation is bound to increase, because let's be real, 1.41 billion, as we think our population estimates, is going to go to probably 1.6 billion by the time we have Viksit Bharat. But I think without being cynical, I think we'll have to first say, can we fix it Bharat first before we move to Viksit Bharat? I think a lot of these narratives around food self-sufficiency is something that we have to pick up steam. We are not. We are very happy. The middle class or the upper middle class is very happy that we are able to buy frozen kiwi fruit all through the year.
Organic carrots and
organic carrots. We don't know what organic means. But how do we fix the basic food problem?
Right, but Srinath, taking a cue from what the economic survey says as far as farm produce is concerned, been relatively better. It's going to be a bumper kharif crop. At least the sowing has been bumper. We will have to wait and watch out for how the food production really turns out. But economic survey, they're projecting that second half of fiscal year 2025 is going to be better, at least on the food front. So I think some of those concerns are, abated there as far as the food inflation is concerned. We're going to do better there.
And that's based on a fall in commodity prices globally. So it's being, sort of reference to that.
But Srinath, thank you very much for taking time out. It's always a pleasure to have you here on the show. We will, of course, come back to you later today. And we hope that you join us immediately after the budget speech.
And with that, it's time for a very short breather. We'll be back with our non-stop budget coverage on the other side. Keep watching News9.
Associate sponsor, New Vertus GT line, style to wander.
एक्सरसाइज करा करा के मेरी जान निकाल देगा, तो तेरा और हमारे बिजनेस का ध्यान कौन रखेगा?
अपने साथ अपनों की लाइफ फिट रखने का परफेक्ट प्लान, कैनरा HSBC लाइफ इंश्योरेंस टर्म प्लान. कैनरा HSBC लाइफ इंश्योरेंस, प्रॉमिसेस का पार्टनर.
You were the chosen one to direct Mr. Bachchan for his first endorsement, for his first appearance on the small screen.
It was a life-changing moment.
Have you been a rebel with a cause?
There was a sense of responsibility, there was a sense of frustration.
Are you worried about cancel culture?
You tell a story with a fierce psychosis, you're gonna spoil it anyway.
History for a reason tonight. Will it change the shape of American foreign policy? Violence has erupted in Manipur once again. How can we pass judgment, sir, before any inquiry that they were volunteers or militants, sir?
It's not the fiefdom of politicians. They owe it to the people. Matter is now more about faith of the millions of devotees than just political slugfest. Does that mean that I can't get a job in Chennai, although I may be best suited for that particular job? They have more civic sense, they have more of civility than all these men. My name is Sudha Sadanand. Welcome to the South Indian.
If it's a cancer, then what?
It's very distressing.
Anyone can have cancer.
Mentality है कि ये बीमारी मुझे नहीं हो सकती.
There's a thing called cancer is right inside me.
सबसे पहले जो होता है ना, डर जो होता है कि now at the end of the world.
My life went upside down.
Stigma associated with it, which is very scary.
In our country, more than 14 lakh people get diagnosed with cancer every year. Out of that, more than 9 lakhs die every year because of cancer.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
You're watching a special budget coverage here on News9. As we count down to the all-important presentation of India's Union Budget 2025 that's going to take place at 11 a.m. this morning, we are putting the focus on you. All of you are watching, all of you taxpayers who are watching and wondering how can you plan your finances in the new financial year? And for that, we have some very special guests joining us, don't we, Karthik?
Absolutely. We've got with us now in the studio Gauri Chadha. Gauri, thank you so much for taking our time on this very, very busy budget day and being here with us physically in the studio. But Gauri is not alone. We've also got a battery of experts joining us this morning. Adil Shetty, CEO Bank Bazaar. Good morning, Adil. Wonderful having you back with us. Mohit Gang, you see him regularly on News9 with all those insights on stock markets and personal finance insights. And we've also got with us Sameer Gogia, Executive Director, Deloitte, joining us this morning. Gauri, let's do the honors with you. Is Budget 2025 finally the moment when we could expect to see a single personal tax regime and not this confusion between an old and a new tax regime?
So I believe that this time we will have a total change in the Income Tax Act. Of course, the Finance Minister did mention in the last budget that in 6 months they will come up with something new, different and easy. So I think if not direct tax code, this will be a new Income Tax Act. And if not a complete change, definitely I think that the old regime will be gone and only new regime will stay. But the problem is that in the new regime there will be no deductions, and in the old regime of course people are still opting for that regime. They are making investments, those compulsory investments like LIC, housing loan repayment, and they are looking forward to get deductions and exemptions for these compulsory investments and expenses which they were claiming earlier. So it will be a big challenge for the government to just keep one regime and not give benefit of these exemptions and deductions. But I think that this will be the best way to keep it simple and easier. And of course, the new regime should have less slab rates.
Right.
Because which also means we're looking at a future of no deductions.
Absolutely.
So no tax saving investments if we do have that new regime in place, which will ensure that you get no benefit for investing in any tax saving products. That will be quite the change, isn't it, when it comes to planning personal finances?
Absolutely. So I want to take this to Adil. Adil, data tells us that over the last 5 years we have seen this sort of switch from the old tax regime to the new tax regime, and there are more and more Indians who are opting regime, for the new tax regime. Now, in case Finance Minister was to look at just one unified tax regime, and that unified tax regime is, let's say, a hybrid of a few deductions, a few exemptions, but a uniform slab rate, and we call it, let's say, you know, like the UPS, the Unified Pension Scheme, a unified tax regime. Is that a possibility, number one? And in the same vein, I want to understand what happens to folks in case deductions go out who have made long-term bets under Section 80C, let's say PPF, which has a long-term lock-in of 15 years.
Both those points were good points. Let's just look at the data. So last year was a tipping point. It made more sense for most salaried people to take the new regime than the old. And people were smart enough that they responded. Over 70% of people last year went through the new regime. So the tipping point has happened. Now you ask an interesting question. We saw a deduction for NPS come in the new regime. We have seen ELSS start to slow down. The AUM is not building up as fast anymore because now the incentive is gone. In the Bank Bazaar Aspiration Index, we saw that the priority of life insurance has now gone down. I believe, Karthik, there is a strong case to just have a simple flat deduction in the new regime.
Okay.
So we already have deductions, but what about a simple 30% flat deduction for up to a 15 lakh gross salary? I think there is a strong case to be made there.
About a standard deduction, you're not really talking about an investment linked deduction. Let me bring that to Sameer Gogia. Sameer, do you think something like that is viable, and even a possibility that you just give a standard deduction and you don't incentivize investments into certain categories which presently fall under Section 80C?
Thanks. Actually, I beg to differ on this point. The reason being, excluding the saving part on ATC, ATL, we also have an HRA, which also plays a major role, which goes away in the new tax regime. And if you see, most of the people in urban India also, they are living on a rented house. So it forms part of the salary. It is a lump sum amount, which I think going away directly to a new regime without any deduction will have a say on this. But we see that more than 75% of the people, they said, have shifted to the new slab, which gives a view that government will cut it down, but in a phased manner, not entirely in this budget.
Right. Sorry, Krishna. You know, Mohit, I just want to have one rejoinder question while we are on this discussion. And you know, more and more people switching to the new tax regime. Is there a sign that people are not making enough investments, and perhaps they are not making enough investments to claim those deductions under Section 80C because they're just not earning well enough and don't have enough disposable income in their hands? And is that the switch from old to the new tax regime that, to your mind, could be driving the numbers?
Hi, morning Karthik and KK. Look, my sense is the older generation, which was working, which is already well past a certain threshold of salary, is all in the old regime. Now they are kind of availing of all the possible discounts and all the possible benefits which are given in the budget, right? The newer folks which are entering the marketplace are perhaps coming in that salary band of 3 lakh to 5 lakh or 3 lakh to 10 lakhs, somewhere around that. And for them, I think the newer tax regime holds extremely good, basically because they are not into investing so much as they are into spending, right? And just to sum this up entirely, for what
Mohit, if I can just request you to pause for just a second, because we're getting live visuals of Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman with the quote-unquote Bahi Khata, the budget document in her hands, and she has left North Block. She's left the Finance Ministry premises. She's just about leaving. These are live visuals coming to you. She is heading towards the Parliament to present the budget. 8th consecutive budget, a record in itself for a finance minister in India, leave alone a woman finance minister.
In fact, yeah, a record for Nirmala Sitharaman and a woman finance minister. But Morarji Desai had 10 union budgets that he presented, and P. Chidambaram had 9.
Yeah.
So I think right now, after the budget presentation that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman makes today, she would be neck to neck with late Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. But I think still has 2 more budgets to go after today to match up to Mr. Morarji Desai, and then perhaps if she continues to be Finance Minister thereon, then we could see her setting a straight record.
But the fact of the matter is that this 8th budget, in which we'll go neck to neck, will be presented in just about less than 2 hours time from now. We have 1 hour and 50 minutes left. She has left the Finance Ministry premises and is on her way to the Parliament to present the budget. In fact, we have Yash, my colleague, joining us right from there. Yash, if you can hear us, talk to us. Huge media presence outside Nirmala Sitharaman's house and now at the North Block.
Well, yes, Krishna, right now I'm at the North Block and Nirmala Sitharaman, the Finance Minister, with her entire team, had just left from the North Block, and you can see, in fact, she's now heading towards the President's house or the Rashtrapati Bhavan. In fact, this is for the final approval of the President, and in fact this is customary, this happens every year. She was there with her entire team. In fact, we have those visuals on our screens also. Nirmala Sitharaman with the MOS Pankaj Chaudhary and also with the senior officials of the Finance Ministry. In fact, it's a big day for her. This is the 8th budget for Nirmala Sitharaman, and in fact the first full budget of the Modi government 3.0.
First full budget of the 3rd term of the Modi government, Karthik, and huge expectations riding on it. We are bringing to you all the latest visuals. Let's also shift focus, Karthik. We're talking about personal finances, and we're focusing on what could be the possibility going forward. If I were to ask you, talk to us. One is the expectations, at least from the middle class watching this budget, that a possible cut in income tax rates, a rationalization of income tax rates, and the other is the possibility to claim larger deductions. So these two are the only things that can put more money in the hands of the middle class. So if people are watching us right now, where do you think their expectations should be?
See, the deductions which we were claiming in old regime, although I'm not saying that I am against that, I really believe that these compulsory deductions did make your retirement secure. But the thing is that the assessees are basically claiming fake deductions. This is a tool of tax planning which is being used for tax evasion. So if you take the data and you reopen all the cases, you will see that around 20-30% of the tax filers are claiming wrong deductions. They have not made those investments or expenses, yet they are claiming deductions, and the biggest case is of HRA. HRA is the most misused section. So I don't think so these deductions will be brought back in the new regime, and if that happens, then there will be no difference between the old regime and the new regime.
Absolutely.
The biggest possibility, I think, would be of reduction of slab rates and rationalization of slabs, which will make it easier as well. Having just 1 or 2 slabs will make it much easier, because right now I think people are still confused between the rebate section and the slabs, and I think still people don't understand how the tax is actually calculated.
Sure.
If somebody is earning more than 15 lakhs, they believe that they are paying 30% tax on the whole of income, but it's not the case. They are paying at the slab rate.
Absolutely.
So there is confusion.
Right. I want to bring in Mohit again into this conversation. Mohit, sometime back before we had the live visuals of the Finance Minister, we were talking about entry level salaries being in the range of 3 to 5 lakh rupees. I want to bring an interesting highlight that came from the Chief Economic Advisor's press conference yesterday after the tabling of the economic survey. And since you cover markets as well as personal finance, I think you're best suited to answer that. He's saying that corporate India is swimming in a pool of profits, and perhaps it needs to pay employees better. What is stopping corporate India from paying us better?
I think, look, finally, everyone is out there for a good business, and everyone, I think, has to earn a fair share of profit, whether be corporate India or whether be individuals at their own level for the kind of effort they're putting in, right? And my sense is the raises in the corporate India, if you were to see on an average level for past few years, have been well over the inflation mark in the market. Now, you can very well argue that's not enough. That's pretty low for an economy which like India and the kind of costs which we are seeing in metro cities. But on an overall level, I think that's been it's been pretty fair. However, the profit pool of corporate India has been increasing. Also because the private capex is not kicking off, Karthik. My sense is that profit pool has to go in building more capacities and in building more new expansions and new plants so that there is more employment and there is more creation. The private capex has been totally missing on the street. It's only the government capex which has been going on in the market. And rather than paying out higher salaries, I think corporate India will be well suited to perhaps invest in incremental capacity.
To capex, and we will come to investments. We also have with us Dr. Amitabh Kundu now joining us. He's an economist. But before I come to you, Mr. Kundu, I want to take one more question to Adil Shetty. Adil, again, this whole debate about middle class and the entire consumption story linked to middle class. Now, consumption is about 60% of India's GDP. One way or another, there has to be a case for consumption to kickstart. We haven't seen the best Q3 results, especially on the FMCG pack. You need this consumption to reignite, and for that consumption to happen, there needs to be more money given to the common man who spends that money and buys more goods and services. So if there are any fears that the government will not be able to meet its fiscal deficit target by reducing the tax slabs, I think the government should also see that if there is more consumption, there is more GST. So what do you think is the best formula going forward from here?
So like you said, we have to get more money into people's hands. I think that's very clear. Now, the government's tax collections have increased. It's happened on the GST side, it's happened on the income tax side. You started the show by saying that there are two ways to do it, and I actually believe the government should consider both. So one is give some inflation adjustment for the tax slabs.
Okay.
The 15 lakh tax slab was set in 2020. Now there's been 21% inflation since then. Take that slab to 18 lakhs. Look at, maybe giving some benefit in terms of the rate. So I think there's one thing to be done with the slabs. But I also believe, right, that the data is showing us that people are putting less money in ELSS. People are not putting as much money as they used to previously in savings and investment. We have seen in the new regime, right, there is a investment-led deduction built for NPS. So I'm saying that there is a strong case to even consider that if you have certain deductions, you're putting it in term insurance, you're taking NPS, you're investing in ELSS, that we create a simple new regime deduction of 30% up to a gross of 15 lakhs. So this will ensure, right, that the people who are investing in the old regime continue to invest and save in the new regime. And I think these are the two tools, I would say, that the government has, and maybe some of it will happen this year, maybe some of it will happen in the future, but this is what the data is telling us.
Got it. Dr. Amitabh Kundu, let's bring you in. I think one way to give more money in the hands of people is also to give more jobs. So job creation, especially in urban pockets, is willy-nilly going to ensure that there is more money available in the system for that consumption story to kick off. So this entire debate about moving farm labor to factories, how do you see that kicking off in the context of job creation in Budget 2025?
In fact, as far as job creation is concerned, the latest data do show from the periodic labor force survey that the employment growth has been very, very rapid after 2020, after COVID period. But it's not the job only, it's what kind of jobs that are being created. Unemployment rate has gone down, but largely because of the household-based unpaid family labor. That certainly doesn't create much demand. But I'll tell you something, there's a projection made by Asian Development Bank, slightly dated, Asia 2030, Asia 2050, and they take the income distribution as it is, and then they make a projection for different income groups, and they say that the emerging middle class is certainly a great possibility which is which is coming up. And in fact, right in the first chapter, they talk about 21st century belonging to Asia, 21st century belonging to India, basically because of the emergence of the middle class. And they have projected that by 2050, the percentage share of India in the global consumption durables would be something like 29% from 7% going up. So certainly, I think there is a possibility of the middle class, contributing substantially to the demand in coming years. But we are making too much about this 3.5% growth rate in the second quarter. Things have changed already, and I do think that the demand in the rural areas has certainly picked up, and as per the RBI study, and the urban areas also, things are coming up. Infrastructure investment from the government was sluggish. This has picked up, and I have a feeling that the prospect for 2025 is not that bad.
Stay with us, Mr. Kundu. We're also getting a quick check of how the markets in India have opened on budget day. Sensex and Nifty opening in the green, both about 1% up. Nifty above the 23,500 mark. If you can pull up the market charts quickly, and Sensex too up about 1%. So markets in sort of flattish to green territory. Sensex above the 77,500 mark, up about 1%. That's where markets have opened this morning, Karthik. So seems like there is not too many jitters on the street as we count down to the budget.
Yeah, you're right. But I'm just looking at the heat map, and the heat map is looking a mix of green and red to me. So let's wait for the data to settle down. Let's take this conversation on job creation that we were doing just a few minutes back now to Samir Gogia. Samir, look at the EPFO data that the economic survey also quoted yesterday.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting data coming through, Krishna. I think, Samir, we are seeing that in the April to November quarter, as many as 95 lakh jobs have been created. Now, when you look at this number against the pre-COVID data coming in, give or take at about, if I remember correctly, at about 45 lakhs or so, then this is a solid markup. It's a solid jump. But in the entire gone by financial year, which is FY24, there were as many as 1.3 crore jobs created. So if you extrapolate this 95 new lakhs in the first 8 months and add another 50% of that, in real terms, we are not really seeing a gross addition in formal jobs looking at EPFO data for this year.
Yeah, I agree to that, but the point is we are looking at a positive trend. If you see the data,
but compared to FY24, is it a positive trend or is it a flat trend? I mean, 95 lakh jobs created in the first 8 months. Now add another 45 lakh jobs to that, you're still looking at a number of about 1.35, 1.36 crore jobs, which is almost the same number of jobs that was created in FY24. And I'm talking about formal jobs, new additions into EPFO, gross new additions. We are not even looking at net. We don't know how many people have actually dropped out of the workforce.
See, we need to measure it with the fact that for the 6th month, we have to give a leverage that this was an election year. There was a reduction or there's a shortfall on the capital expenditure by the government. And what creates job is when we have an infrastructural investment by the government, and government is clear that they alone can't do it. They want private partnership as well to contribute to that. So if we are seeing the trend, there is a shortage on the capital expenditure. Once the capital expenditure is expended on the infrastructure and the jobs or the infrastructure is created, any amount which is spent on infrastructure creates a 2 or 3 times fold in the GDP. It helps in creating more industries, more jobs, and that is the trend which we intend to see in future. So we have to give a leeway that we had.
Don't take it, let it stabilize. Wait for another 8 minutes, let data stabilize.
Yeah, we need to give that leeway to government that it is a positive trend, and once we have more private parties, and we have seen the corporates have also shown a huge increase in their profitability. Once they spend that in an economy and we have an infrastructural development, we'll see more of the jobs creating. But it's a positive trend, what I can feel.
At this stage, the fact of the matter is that the number of manufacturing jobs that have been created have not met up to expectations. Still, we live in a country where more than half the number of jobs that are created in the agriculture sector. And even if you look at the current financial year, the growth has been driven by an improvement in the rural sector, in the agricultural sector, agricultural and services contributing. But the fact of the matter is that agriculture continues to be the largest employer in this country.
That's true. So, what we also need to understand is that the nature of manufacturing itself is changing. It's no longer as people intensive as it used to be. There's more high technology going into manufacturing, which means every plant that comes up needs fewer and fewer people. So I think that's a dilemma. So what do you do then? You need more people who are highly skilled. So are we training enough people in those skills? I think that's a challenge. So I don't think we can bank entirely on manufacturing to pick up the slack. I think services, which is doing well, it needs to pick up the slack. We need to make sure that agriculture gives people enough reason to be more productive and stay employed, because if you look at the second and third generation of farmers, their children don't really want to be in agriculture. They want to come to the urban centers and maybe even do deliveries, like work for Zomato, Swiggy and all these companies. So I think if it has to be a multi-pronged approach to employment. In fact, I wanted to ask Dr. Kundu, if he's still there with us, a question on this, what the economic survey talks about. Like there's a growing trend towards formalization of employment, and Karthik also talked about the EPFO data, Dr. Kundu. How do you look at this formalization of employment in the growing trend of formal employment being created in the economy? Dr. Kundu, your views?
If you look at the periodic labor force survey, as far as the urban areas are concerned, there is an increase in the manufacturing sector significantly higher than the last year, because this data is coming yearly. I think EPFO data also does suggest in the urban areas, there is some kind of a formalization taking place in the manufacturing. But I must tell you, in the last 3-4 years, the largest increase in the employment is concentrated in the household-based, family-based manufacturing employment. I don't understand what kind of job is this. This can't be a very decent employment. Although this manufacturing, but this is, I think, at a very low level that's taking place, because the EPFO data does suggest that that is not happening very much. So I would certainly put a question mark to the employment growth in the urban areas in the manufacturing sector coming out from the periodic labor force survey, which is projecting a very rosy image, which I don't think needs to be really accepted on the face of it. Thank you.
All right, Adil, I believe you're on a timer, so I want to take one more question to you before we let you go. We are just an hour and a half away from the budget presentation. We've spoken enough about tax, but your one wish list from Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on the personal finance front from budget 2025, and something that will really disappoint you if it doesn't come through.
You see, I think that the demographic dividend part, which is really tapering off very fast, the percentage of the elderly population is going to be rising very, very rapidly. So I personally thought there should have been but income tax slabs should be very different. But the Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana, which is really nothing. If you take the contribution made by the people, 55 rupees from 18 years onwards, forget about the government's contribution. The rate of return given on this scheme is only 8%, which the organized sector gets in any case. Myself retiring from Jawaharlal Nehru University, on 30 lakhs I get something like 8%, whereas for the poorest unorganized sector you're paying just 8% for 3 lakhs of their deposits, which I think is something which needs to be really addressed, because unorganized sector is there, is a substantial part, and taking care of the elderly population in that age group should be the first priority as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Adil, your views.
So we spoke in detail about the tools to leave more money in people's hands. The thing I'd really like to see, however, is a focus on innovation. I think today, with what's happening with AI, with what India's done with digital public infrastructure, we have a real opportunity to unleash India's startups and India's MSMEs, right? we need to make sure that they get access to the best and world-class digital public infra, which can enable them to build businesses. There's an opportunity on the MSME side, on the DigiLocker side, in terms of creating national infrastructure for AI, so our companies can get the highest quality anonymized training data. So I really believe that this is an opportunity to capture the entire innovation space. The digital public infrastructure has been a fabulous foundation, and I'd like talk starting in the same way that we say that we're putting 11.11 lakh crores in physical infra. I'd like a similar conversation starting about what is India doing to build the best digital public infrastructure in the years to come.
All right, Adil Shetty, wonderful having you with us, and we hope to get you back post-budget as well, and wishing you all the best for the budget viewing, and I hope your wishes like ours come true in budget 2025.
Let's now put the focus on the markets as well. They've just about opened. Mohit, talk to us. As far as the street is concerned, how do you expect the markets to react going into the budget? Because it's right now seemingly opening on a flattish note. But what do you think are going to be the triggers through the day?
Yeah. Look, I think the trigger, one of the biggest triggers was set by the Prime Minister himself yesterday. I think when he tweeted saying that I hope and wish that Goddess Lakshmi blesses the poor people in this budget. Right. So I think the market is taking that as a signal, and perhaps a precursor to that. You saw the consumption stocks kind of rallying yesterday in a big way. Right. So the market is taking that as a precursor that there'll be some new schemes announced, or there'll be some more dole-outs or something which can just spur consumption, basically, which has been the sore point of the economy for last 2 odd years, if I would say that. Right. So I think more employment and a spur in the consumption, and whether that is done through tax breaks or whether that is done through increased government spending, I think that's something which the budget, which everyone would wait and watch out for. But my one wish list, if you were to ask, is how does government revive the animal spirits in the economy back, which is getting the private capex back, increasing focus on spending more money on infrastructure, and perhaps kicking off a cycle of employment. I think those are the 3 things which we are watching out for.
Cycle of employment and investment should come in. Mohit, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on this very important day.
Wishing you a good trading days.
Absolutely. And I hope what Modi said, wishing Lakshmi on everybody does come true. And that includes us, Krishna, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Us and all those watching this as well. Everybody is hoping that Goddess Lakshmi does bless them today. And that is the reason why we have an entire day-long special programming. We will be telling you all that you need to know about Budget 2025, and we're also hoping that all your aspirations and our aspirations get fulfilled in this budget, isn't it, Karthik?
Absolutely. Well, let's take this conversation forward. We have spoken to Adil and Mohit about their budget wish list. Gauri, your wish list seems pretty clear that that there is going to be a single unified tax rate. There isn't really going to be an old and a new tax regime. Now, if there is a unified tax rate, how should the tax slabs be tinkered?
Ideally, I think tax slab should be up to at least 10 lakhs nil, but I don't think that will happen. The basic exemption will go up till maximum 5 lakhs. But according to me, it should be till 10 lakhs nil, and above 10 to 20, they can have a 10% rate, and after above 20, it should be around 20% rate, which will obviously relate to the corporate tax rate, because corporate tax rate has been reduced a lot over the years from 30% to 25, 22 and 15% in different cases. So the tax collection of the personal tax is much more than the corporate tax now. So I think it's time now to reduce the corporate tax rate, and we cannot be taxing the middle class at the highest slab rate, which is 30%, then plus surcharge and cess, of course. So of course a slab rate of 3 slabs till 10, 20 and above 20 would be the best way out. And apart from that, I think we should see some changes in the deduction in the income from house property section, where we get a flat deduction of 30%. It's been going on since long. I think we will see a higher deduction in that, maybe 40-45%, and we should see some changes in the capital gain taxes, but unlikely, because in the last budget only the capital gain changes were made, but I still feel that there should be some change and some decrease in the capital gain tax.
All right, Karthik, we're looking at a situation where everybody is looking for a cut. The corporate sector wants corporate taxes to go down. Salaried people watching this broadcast want income tax to go down. Both can't possibly go down in one budget, can
and Finance Minister wants the fiscal deficit to go down, right? So,
but just to add to what Gauri was saying on the capital tax gains, I think there is a thought process, Gauri, you'll be interested to know, where CBD, at least some members of CBDT are inclined to even lowering below the current rate, might even bring it below 10%.
Right.
So that's one thought process. How soon that gets implemented?
But Shri, again, I have a little bit of a dichotomy there, because yesterday in the economic survey, there is also this little bit of a mildly put warning against asset bubbles being created. So, I think the finance ministry going out of the way to propel market-based investments, and that in the context of the economic survey warning against asset bubbles being made, especially at a time when in any case we are dealing with high valuations, may not really be something that the government would want.
And Shri, before you answer that, I'm going to quickly put the focus on the live visuals coming to us straight. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman just met India's President Draupadi Murmu with the budget document in her hand. These are the latest visuals of Nirmala Sitharaman entering the Parliament premises, entering and meeting with the President.
MOS Finance Pankaj Chaudhary also along with her, and the entire Finance Ministry team. Well, I think one person missing, interestingly from this scene today is Mr. Sanjay Malhotra, the newly appointed RBI Governor. And he has his task also cut out in exactly a week from now, 7th of February.
The next monetary policy review, isn't it? All coming back to back, quite the special February that we have lined up, starting with the 1st of February, which is the budget. And then, of course, rare occurrence of an election a week after the budget. And then even as the elections take place, we have a monetary policy review. So much focus on interest rates in India. Clearly, the budget could set the tone really for where interest rates need to go from here. If you want growth back, then the much awaited rate cuts is something that both the corporate sector in India would be keenly looking out for, and of course investors in India as well, looking for a rate cut in the country. But visuals on your screens are from moments ago when India's President Draupadi Murmu met India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Before the Finance Minister goes on to present Budget 2025.
And the digital Bahi Khata in the Finance Minister's hand. Well, this is something again that changed, I think, the Finance Ministry going paperless in a sign of things to come.
Eco-friendly budget presentation.
Eco-friendly budget presentation. Well, of course, the charger does guzzle up some energy.
That's true, but yes, in fact, you see in the visuals, Finance Minister sort of giving a quick brief and overview, possibly, of the budget to India's President Draupadi Murmu. How we wish we could be a
fly on the wall?
A fly on the wall, in that meeting.
Peek into that tablet and see what are the numbers.
But yes, all we have right now are the visuals, so we'll have to fill up the rest with our imaginations as to what that conversation could be. But we are getting to you the visuals and the analysis of Budget 2025 right here on News9. Barnik, this is a budget, if of all the 8 budgets that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, 7 that was presented before, this one comes with huge weight of expectations, isn't it? Because this is expectations both at a single individual level, at a sector level, and at an economy level, because of the data that we've been presented with. Inflation going up, growth coming down, pressure on the middle class, not enough private capital infusion into the economy. This is, talk about a tightrope walk. This is to be one of the tightest rope walks possible for the budget.
So I think one thing which is notably different this time is that the economy seems structurally on a sticky wicket, right? We've looked at previous budgets. Obviously, we've gone through COVID, but this is the first time we are facing a trifecta of crisis. There is a consumption crisis, there's an investment crisis in terms of FDI, and there's an interest rate and high inflation crisis. So I think for us to navigate this while not increasing expenditure and meeting fiscal deficit targets is very important. I think while the markets will cheer any kind of tax cuts or tax incentives, if you come back on Monday, which is the real reflection of what investors will look at, if the fiscal deficit number doesn't get on a path to 4% or below, you will see a lot of foreign capital also moving out. So it is a tightrope. I think the market short-term reaction are a very temporal reaction. We have to see what happens in the long term. But again, I would keep a very a clear view on what the fiscal deficit number looks like, because the finance minister has committed a glide path to 4.2 or 4.4% in the next one fiscal year, and a pathway to under 4% in 3 or 4 fiscal years. If you don't get there, there will be a lot of international capital which will start flowing out, and all the net flows into India will again become negative. So that is the one number I'd look out, is a measure of the tight.
That's the one number we haven't discussed so far, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We're talking about cutting down income tax rates, cutting down corporate tax rates. The one number, because this is going to be a trade-off between that growth versus fiscal discipline, isn't it, Karthik?
Absolutely, because you need to get that consumption story back on track, and for that consumption story to come back on track, there needs to be more money in the hands of the people. For that money to be in the hands of the people, you cut taxes, and if you cut taxes, where do you get your tax revenue
Talk about chicken and egg situation, isn't it?
And inflation on both chicken and egg and everything else.
And high GST.
And high GST. So, Manik, I want to actually touch upon something that you had mentioned a few minutes ago before we cut into the live visuals of Finance Minister and the President. And this is about that sort of beautiful graph where you saw the income tax, the personal income tax surpassing corporate tax. Now in 2019 and outside of the budget in 2019 in the month of September, if I'm not mistaken, is when Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had cut down corporate tax rates, and the endeavor really was that by giving a little extra rope to the corporate sector, there is going to be added investment, capex cycle, and by the virtue of capex you will have jobs that will get created. But then came COVID, and since then we sort of kept that corporate tax rate stagnant. Now the middle class has this constant comparison with the corporate tax rate, especially those who are paying 30% tax on their income, and they say that the corporates are taxed much lower at 25%, some even at 22%. What is the rationale behind a lower corporate tax rate, and is the direct income tax, personal income tax collection being higher than corporate tax actually economically something wrong?
So I think two wrongs don't make a right. Just
what are the two wrongs? Is a lower corporate tax rate
I think the two wrongs is to interpret the data and increase the corporate tax rates. I think in terms of income tax, you have to talk of income tax and also indirect taxes like GST. The government has done a remarkable job of trying to squeeze a lemon to its maximum, right? And getting as much money as it can from personal tax from multiple sources. On corporate tax, the government should realize that just by cutting rates does not crowd in private investment. I think we had a broader discussion on competitiveness, we had a discussion on ease of doing business. Unless a lot of those things are changed, just a tax rate cut will not get us the private investment. That being said, if you look at what's going on around the world, the US has actually pulled out of their arrangement, which was a minimum corporate tax arrangement, because Trump has announced that he wants to tax corporates at 12%, 10%.
And no personal income tax. I think that is something else I wanted to come to Sri about, that Trump is saying that, hey, I'm going to make America great again. We're going to drill, baby, drill, and we will have so much money by virtue of our exports that there would be no
and
need.
We're going to tariff, baby,
tariff, baby, tariff, and there are going to be no income taxes.
So I think we need to take many of Mr. Trump's claims with a pinch of
with
salt.
How much salt? I'm just wondering with how much salt?
Quite a lot, I think. Because, the way I look at it, if the immigrant crackdown continues the way it does, we already have reports of immigrant workers not showing up for work at construction sites in fear of being arrested and deported. So we are potentially looking at a scenario where the wages are going to go up in the US. Now, when wages go up, obviously workers are going to be happy, but the overall economy, your inflation is going to go up. The cost of buying just about everything is going to go up for everyone else, the economy. So I think similarly is the situation with the finance minister here. I'm sure she'd love to cut taxes for Aam Aadmi, but the fact is India has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios of the big economies. We are almost at half of what is acceptable for an economy of our size. It's about 11.7% tax to GDP ratio. Now, unless you are in a situation where more people are paying taxes. We don't want Indians paying more taxes, but we certainly want more Indians paying taxes. Right, so that is the challenge. How do you widen the tax net? How do you make sure there are no leakages? Agriculture continues to be a holy cow. Is there something we can do to bring agricultural income under tax net? Because we know that even rich people suddenly become agricultures and they say that, this agricultural income can't be taxed. Can that sort of bullshit be called? And can we end all that? I think that's a thing we need to look at. How do we broaden the tax base and make sure that people who are like in services, people like you and me who are honest taxpayers, we are not unnecessarily burdened by extra taxes.
Right. So one way to do that, to broaden the tax net, and let's assume that agriculture continues to be the holy cow that it is, because politically that could very well be a hit wicket for the government.
In fact, if that question gets asked before every budget, doesn't it?
Right.
Is it
Are
time
you
to
going
tax,
to tax agriculture? At least the rich farmers, right?
Yeah.
So again, I think one way to look at it is that have a classification within the farm sector.
Yes.
Household income in the farm sector, and let
tax
it be
slabs.
2 times, 3 times that of the above nil tax slab for income tax. If income up to 7 lakh rupees, Gauri, is nil tax, you don't pay any taxes on income up to 7 lakh rupees, even if you take it 3 times. Don't tax agriculture up to 21 lakh rupees, but beyond that, tax them at par.
I think politically it will be a challenge to tax the farmers, although I am of the same view that the agricultural income should be taxed not at 21 also. I think maybe above 50 lakh they can put some tax. There are farmers who are earning in CRs. But the challenge is, politically it will not go down well, but if we talk about the other sector, the middle class, which we were just talking about, how many people are actually paying tax? Only 2 crores. The return filers are 9 to 10 CR every year, but actually people paying taxes are just 2 CR. So the population of 140 CR is being catered by the taxes paid by just 2 CR.
Yeah.
So we need to bring this, we need to extend this bracket. And now, I think this is a myth that people say that if the government reduces taxes, the collections will go down. If you see the past data, it has always happened then that when the government reduced tax, the collection has increased. And let's not go too far. Last year only the taxes were reduced, but if you see our direct tax collection, it has increased. So I don't think so. The government should be thinking on those lines that if we reduce direct taxes, personal direct tax rate, our collection will go down, because I think it will be a positive change only. And apart from that, more and more people will be willing to pay taxes. Right now, because of the high tax rate, there are people who are going to evade tax. Right. So once you make it simpler and lower tax rate, I think more people will come out and they will pay tax.
Right. Hypothetically speaking, Krishna, Shri, I don't know. I mean, this could be the budget where the government actually in the near term doesn't have much to lose by making that bold decision of taxing agriculture.
Exactly.
You don't have a national election. You don't have elections in Punjab, Haryana, UP, the entire agri belt.
I was just about to say that. In fact, if there was ever a time to take politically sensitive decisions, this is the time to do it, right? Perfect time. The first budget of the third term of Prime Minister Modi, isn't it?
And frankly, you can't justify why a farmer who has 3 luxury cars parked in front of his home shouldn't be paying taxes. I don't see any moral justification in that at all.
I disagree, by the way. I think it's a minority government, right? Propped up by 2 alliance partners in Andhra Pradesh and Bihar, who have huge constituents as farmers. I don't think there will be any movement on agricultural taxation, how fair it may sound. I think to the broader point, let's look at reality, right? I don't think we should be too disappointed that 2 or 3 crore people are paying taxes. At $2,500 per capita income, right? Our tax slabs or effective tax slabs where people start paying taxes is close to $9,500 or $10,000, around the 7 lakh mark, right? So it means by definition around 80% of your people are out of the tax net because they're not earning enough and you can't tax them. So maybe there is 10% leakage, maybe there's 20% leakage, but it's not 80-90% leakage as the numbers say, because to be fair, if you just look at an income pyramid, barely 15-20 crore people have
so how
the
do you explain the tax to GDP ratio being just 11 points? Even South Africa is 24%.
tax to GDP ratio is 11.7% because we are a poor country. We don't have enough money to give.
So there's no tax efficiency in the economy.
There is no capital efficiency in the economy from government spending, right? So there are broader questions on how effective is the government spending. So again, there are lots of loopholes. We can plug them as we go along, but the broader question is, how do we create more economic opportunities for people? If that gets created, more taxes will get collected.
Right. Shri, back to your question, in fact, what you were asking, Barnik, how do you increase and how do you improve the tax to GDP ratio? I think the simplest way to do that would be to encourage movement of farm sector labor to factory. And that again comes back to the larger function of capital investments by the government, by the private sector. And unfortunately, we don't see much momentum in the private sector capex as well, because guess what? We continue to be living in high inflation, because of which RBI keeps rates high, and the same farmers whom we are incentivizing are not able to efficiently, crop rotate and diversify and bring prices down. So at some level, the inflation problem that India is dealing with, which is resulting in high interest rates and low job creation and low capex, could come back to the farm sector, which is not delivering as efficiently as it should.
Correct. So it goes back to what we discussed earlier, Karthik. Why will the private sector invest? It'll invest if it's assured of return, a decent, fair return on the investment. How will you ensure that? You will first of all, make it easy for them to set up a factory, so that my money starts making, returns as early as possible, and it is not stuck in bureaucratic approvals, and I'm just investing crores and crores up, and then everything gets delayed, because there's a, time value to money as well. Then second, the per unit return on investment. So unless we fix these fundamental issues, I have no incentive as a private sector to really go ahead and increase my capacity, especially if the domestic consumption is also soft.
Right. So exactly. So comes back to the whole question of consumption. Are you really looking immediately your return on investment as an immediate target, or does corporate India feel there just isn't enough consumption, and that brings us back to more money in the hands of people, prop up consumption?
Yeah, but it's not enough, right? If you just put a few thousand rupees in everyone's hands, right, will that create the private investment cycle? Highly unlikely, right? So maybe if you look at what has happened, right, any kind of tax increases which the government has done has directly gone to the consumer, whether it be GST or everything, right? So again, the inflation conundrum is different, because that may be more supply side than demand side. You can't talk of falling consumption, and we've been talking of rural consumption distress for 2-3 years, and now there's an urban consumption distress, but high inflation rates. That suggests it's a structural problem on the supply side, which needs to be solved separately. I think there's a separate problem of having a lower interest rate regime, which actually crowds in private investment, right? So these are different problems, and I think we need to have a different approach to solve it, right? We cannot be afraid of dropping interest rates because it will increase inflation. Inflation has increased because of supply side issues. So demand has to be addressed, but more importantly, what will it take for us to get more FDI back into the country? Till that happens, I don't think any of these conversations are beyond the practical.
Okay. We at this stage have Feroz Aziz, Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi, was joining us. Feroz, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this budget day morning. Markets opening flattish in the green. The charts say about 1.5% up for the Census and the Nifty. Talk to us, how do you see the trading day pan out as far as budget day is concerned? How much jitters do you think are there on the street?
I think there is more skew towards positive than negative, because all the three larger participants have gone reasonably light, or they have been bullish. One is FIIs have gone light on index futures, which was 88% negative short side on 30th of Jan. Only 11%. Of course, you got some degree of short covering. I think the number dropped to 82, 83 yesterday. On the long side, on the cash market side, FII have gone short. The prop guys who are the FII prop has sold most of the small cap stock. That's where the carnage of 11% fall comes from. It is not the index FIIs who have sold. Those are the prop short-term traders. Our guys have sold. So they've gone light completely. So the broader market is a lot safer today. Then BIIs, if you look at mutual funds, small cap, yesterday there was 349 crores came into small cap funds, which is a reasonable barometer of the domestic sentiment. Retail, only leveraged retail has sold in the month of January. Wherever they've taken margin funding from the broker, those have got unbound. Other full cash down retail and HUFs and corporates have not sold. last month because they don't like selling a stock 30% down. So I think they've gone light. That's why you see yesterday the synthetic futures closed at 85 rupees premium. In the morning, it's quoting at only 15-17 rupees premium, which says that yesterday when markets closed, they were far more bullish than they are in the morning. I personally think there is very little chance of a free fall, even if there is some degree of bad news or lower than expected market sentiment from the budget.
I just want to bring up some data, and if you can pull up corresponding graphics for that as well. You know, out of the 7 budgets that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has presented thus far, today being her 8th, markets have actually ended positively just twice out of those 7 times that she has presented budget, and all other 5 times markets have been in the red. And I don't know if that's a sign of things to come today or not, but what are those 2 or 3 triggers that you think will excite markets? Because I don't know if it's fair to say that the bear run is in right now, but there is this bearish sentiment on the street, barring maybe, you know, just yesterday and 2 days prior to that, where we've been able to breeze past that 23,000 level on the Nifty. But that sentiment does seem to be bearish right now, not just with what's happening in India, but what's happening in the world.
Yes, Karthik, what happens is the larger the bearish sentiment before an event, the larger the likelihood that there could be short covering. When you are going with a lot of froth into an event, I think that's the data of 7, 5 of them being negative and 2 being positive implies that there's a huge expectation of Nirmala ma'am, and she that's already priced in. So that's what it implies. So we might now, if you look at the 23rd July 2024 budget, where after the general elections of 4th June, we saw a huge long build-up in every index future. If you look at FII as a reasonable barometer of how leveraged the market is, all the index futures, including the mid-cap index futures, FIIs were more long. So point I'm trying to get to is, since there is a reversal of sentiment in most of the last 7, that implies that there was a huge expectation of bullishness, and this one is a little opposite, where there is more bearishness getting into a budget, which has not happened in the past couple of budgets at least.
Asking about market reaction is that, you know, in the recent times, okay, just before we come to you, we're also getting the latest visuals of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman getting the traditional dahi chini from India's President Draupadi Murmu, a customary practice before she goes on to present a budget. Bear in mind, it is a long speech, usually at least an hour. If not more.
And the cavalcade is on its way now to the Parliament. Live shots on your screens right now. The Finance Minister's cavalcade. After that, Dahi Chini, which is considered to be shubh, auspicious. To begin with. You know, any good activity, it's supposed to essentially be a practice to begin anything that is good, that is supposed to be auspicious. Her cavalcade there on your screens right now. Very, very shortly, just a couple of minutes from now, I believe, an hour to go before that
hour and 5 minutes to be precise.
Hour and 5 minutes to be precise before the budget speech really starts. Now, you know, it's the President's government, and yesterday when she was addressing, in fact, right before the budget session, she made a lot of remarks, and she was talking about how there's been substantial sum allocated for the development of the poor, you know, 25 crore families which have been taken outside of the poverty. There have been jobs created by the way of at least 3 job schemes. That continues to be the focus area, and how India is a beacon of hope and has been one in a turbulent time, Krishna, that have been prevalent now for a couple of years.
Yeah, and it continues to be, despite the fact that India's growth rates are not where we would ideally want it to be. India continues to be a beacon of hope. Feroz, you know, so much talk and chatter around this budget, and in fact markets open on a Saturday budget day. Not the first time, it has happened before, but the fact of the matter is that expectations are very high, isn't it, Feroz? Be it the corporate sector or be it the individual taxpayers out there who are trying to save as much money as possible and invest it in everything from directly in stocks to mutual funds, you know, relief in terms of more disposable income in the hands of the middle class, and relief for the corporates in terms of, you know, possible, way forward in terms of cutting down of interest rates, and more importantly, a possible cut in corporate tax rates as well. So the expectations are going through the roof from all across the board in this budget.
Yes, certainly the expectations are reasonably high. But I think the expectation from the budget, if I have to say from our side, we look at simplicity, which I think has been the theme. A consistency of, because it's a budget which is just spaced 8 months after a budget we've just seen in July. And there were a lot of changes made. All the asset classes, taxation changed, unlisted, equity, listed equity, debt, all of them went through a tax change, including real estate. And that's why I don't expect the direct tax code, which is one thing which I'm really looking forward to make too many changes. But the direct tax code, which she spoke about in the budget speech last time around, is something which could bring in a lot of simplicity. There are about 70-80 sections, which I call the Jugaad sections. They should be gotten rid of to make simplicity. If you look at our budget this year, we are in tax administration, we are spending 2,09,000 crores out of our 48 lakh crores. So we are spending 4% to just administer taxes in the right fashion. So simplification also saves money for the government, not just eases the life of the SSC, point one. Point two, I personally expect, these are structural changes I'm speaking about, no partiality towards asset classes. Section 54 and Section 54F is the biggest partiality known to mankind, where you sell equity, buy real estate, you get a tax discount on equity. If you sell real estate and buy another real estate, you don't pay tax on the previous property. Assume if this was done on mutual funds, what kind of impetus does the multiplier effect of capital investments could come? So I personally, in spite of managing HNI money, would hate me to say this, I think they should get rid of inconsistencies or partialities between asset classes. Indexation was brought back for real estate, but not brought back for debt funds after the lobbying in the last budget. I think these inconsistencies should be removed. That's my expectation. Of course, there are a lot of expectation, and you are the best judge of how the industry and the retail participants also expect. But these were some of my expectations which stand out.
Well, we can't talk about who's the best judge here, because we're all, waiting for that final presentation of the budget document. Nobody knows what's there inside the digital Bahi Khata, but the visuals on your screens of President Draupadi Murmu meeting India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman giving a quick brief overview of the budget presentation.
And the officials, of course, of the Finance Ministry there on your screens right now. These visuals came in just a couple of minutes ago, where Finance Minister went to meet the President. President Draupadi Murmu received the Finance Minister. There was an exchange, obviously, of auspicious dahi chini, where, we all know Finance Minister is going to have a long, hard day in front of her. Not just about budget presentation. That's just one part of it. She'll later be answering all the questions from journalists and reporters through the day. She'll also be appearing on different media channels, primarily to begin with on Doordarshan as a national broadcaster. Yeah. So she has a very, very long day ahead of her. In fact,
she's been having long weeks in the lead up to this budget as well. We have Gaurang Shah now joining us of GeoJit. We also have Yuvika Singhal joining us from Quantico. Yuvika, Gaurang, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. Let me quickly ask Gaurang, tell us, the Finance Minister has been given the dal chini, the dahi chini, so to speak. But the dahi chini is what, the India's salaried class is expecting as well.
Well, hi, thank you so much, and morning to all of you all. So I expect there is something for the Aam Aadmi in the budget, as you rightly mentioned. But one thing I would like to say is that even before yesterday, when we saw the economic survey and we heard certain comments from the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, I think since 20th of Jan, since Donald Trump was sworn in as President of the United States of America, statements made before the presidential election and statement made after he was sworn in and he assumed the Oval Office, my sense was that this budget needs to address a lot of policy changes, ironing out certain shortfalls in certain policies, and as well as implementing new policies and making necessary changes. Now, whether it is to do with...
stay on. These are live visuals coming in just as the Finance Minister enters the Parliament building on your screens right now. She's flanked by her core team, people there on your screens who are responsible for the budget that she's carrying in that digital Bahi Khata. Gaurang, please continue.
So as I was saying, as the expectation is there, hope either some of it or most of it gets delivered today. He sees that needs a push is consumption, credit growth and capex. Along with that, allocation towards, as it has been happening in earlier budget, defense, infrastructure, power, railways, and addressing the biggest issue of unemployment. I think these are some areas where there is a lot of expectation. Of course, one of the biggest expectation is the standard deduction and changes in tax slabs which exist as of now as far as the common man is concerned. So a lot of expectation, but as we all know, there are limitations with the Honorable Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji as to what she can deliver and what she cannot deliver. But I normally don't expect much out of budget, but this time around today, I am pinning a little bit of hope on the budget.
Right. I think we all are pinning a lot of hope on the budget. Let me quickly also get in Yuvika Singhal, economist from Quantico, joining us on the show. With me in the studio, we have an addition. Brijesh Pandey is with us to give you all the political insights of what you can expect as far as politics around the budget is concerned. Let's first get to the economics around budget. Yuvika, we saw the economic survey. The GDP print for financial year 25 is about 6.3%. Going forward for financial year 26, about 6.2 to 6.8%. So that's the varied range there. The macros are still looking stable. That is what the economic survey is suggesting, that we have been a little off path recently in the first half of financial year 25, but we are getting there despite all geopolitical possibilities and how things are likely to turn out starting here.
Absolutely. So I think the economic survey was a fairly pragmatic assessment of the state of the economy. And to remind us all that first half of the year did not pan out as expected. The growth was off to a slower start because of temporary factors, be it the timing of national elections or the intense heat waves and excessive monsoon in some parts of the country. But I think the fact that we all have to contend with, and the concerns are also brewing on that front, is that growth, even despite expectations would pick up in the second half of the year, for the full year, it's likely to be somewhere in the vicinity of 6.4%. And as the economic survey pointed out, next year's growth range of 50 basis points that they have put out in the range of 6.3 to 6.8 is somewhat below what ideally we would want India to grow. And this is a point that the economic survey also highlighted, that if we want to achieve the target of becoming a developed economy in line with the goals of the Viksit Bharat vision of the government, achieving those targets in 2047, India cannot do with the 6.5-7% growth. We cannot be content with this kind of a growth. Right. We have to aspire to achieve an 8% plus growth. And that is, I think, the message that the economic survey carries, and what we should also see in the budget, that there has to be a more decisive focus on getting growth back, not just in the second half of this fiscal year, but a longer term vision of getting growth closer to India's growth potential, which could be somewhere in the range of 7 to 8%. And that is, I think, the focus of the budget should be. Now, that could be done through a variety of levers. And also this assumes greater importance at a time when the global environment is somewhat more hostile. So we do not have the support of the global growth, or there is rising protectionism, tariffs, right, which are going to play out much more differently. So how do we get the growth levers moving? Whether we want to focus on short-term stimulus to consumption, we want to make consumption recovery much more durable by focusing on jobs, employment, focusing on manufacturing, greater focus on PLI schemes, and the government will have to keep the pedal pressed as far as its own capex is concerned. Right. Because given the kind of hostility that we are seeing in the global environment and concerns of a domestic slowdown, it looks somewhat difficult that the private sector capex recovery would be just around the corner.
Right. Feroz, that's the balance that has to be struck, isn't it? The fact of the matter is that one is there is an urgent need to spark growth bring it to the levels that India needs, and the other is to ensure fiscal discipline, because fiscal discipline will also ensure enough and more foreign money comes into the country. At a time when we're worried about foreign portfolio investors taking money out of the country, the economic survey alluded to the fact that so much money has left the country through foreign portfolio investors. FDI again not at its peak levels, far below its peak levels. So that balance is going to be very important, isn't it, Feroz?
Yes, certainly. I think fiscal prudence is very critical. But as far as where we see it from, measuring fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP is one way. We look at it not as a percentage of GDP so seriously, but as a percentage of total revenue. See, expenditure is a bank account debit, revenue is a bank account credit. Seeing it as a percentage, as a household, how much do I earn, how much do I spend? You would see that in FY23, our fiscal deficit as a percentage of revenue had gone to 71%, and it is today 50.3%. That means if I'm getting 48 lakhs of expenditure, I'm earning 16 lakhs lesser, 32 lakhs. That's the, in our opinion, more tangible method of measuring fiscal prudence than the GDP, because GDP is not a bank account credit number. So to answer your pointed question, it is very important, fiscal prudence, but I would use the barometer of how much do I spend more than how much I earn, which is expenditure, excess expenditure as a percentage of revenue. That's 50.3% for this financial year. Second, when it comes to growth, I'm very happy to note that last year's capital expenditure budget was not academic. It was actually spent apart from 50,000 crores. So I'm very, very hopeful that again, the expenditure of the capital expenditure budget of 11.1, which is the one which gives you a 3.2 multiplier in the economy, I think should do the trick and get us to that 7% number and supersede the economic survey's expectation.
Right. Thank you so much, Feroz Aziz, for joining us this morning in the build-up to the budget. We'll let you go at this stage. Hope to see you soon after the budget presentation. And clearly, the talk right now, like the way the markets are right now, it's all wait and watch, isn't it? Because, you need everything. Absolutely. This is a budget that has to deliver on all counts. It has to deliver on the personal income tax front. It has to deliver in terms of growth. It has to deliver in terms of the way ahead, the road ahead in terms of India's economy, the consumption story. So, I'm going to be, keeping my eyes peeled on the budget speech.
And it really brings to fore what Gaurang said. And he said you really don't have a lot of expectation from a single budget to really deliver anything substantial. But this time around, given all the uncertainty and all that has panned out in the last 20 days, and the fact that there is an imminent election now in Delhi, I think put that in context, there is a lot of hope from the budget. Let me quickly bring in Brijesh.
Elections and Delhi elections, Brijesh, how can...
Brijesh, it's all going to be about middle class, cannot be direct sops for Delhi. At least directly.
I say don't count the chickens before they hatch. And if I borrow what Gaurang was saying, that that Aam Aadmi is going to be one of the consistent thing to look out for. I think another thing is also with there, which is Aam Aadmi Party. So from Aam Aadmi to Aam Aadmi Party, the government would be looking at this budget with certain stops for Delhi, because employment is not only about economics. Employment and job generation is also about politics. The government spoke about the kind of job they are generating, and I think one of the stick with which the opposition party beat the government is that you promised 2 crore jobs. Where are they? So it has become a political hot potato for the government as well. And elections are very rarely you see that today is a budget day, and 2 days later there is voting in the national capital. And we have also seen Arvind Kejriwal coming up with one manifesto devoted only to middle class. Now this has never happened before. Middle class is something whose valor is echoed inside the hallowed chamber of parliament. By their life, they are thanked that you go and pay taxes, and we are thankful to you for that. Now after that, go outside, pay more taxes, enjoy your life, because you are not a political entity. If you're poor, you're rural, you are catered for because you are a mass vote bank. So this time I think a lot of heat will be on the government as to how they navigate this choppy waters of what the Arvind Kejriwals of the world will do once the budget is out, because they will be not looking into micro and macro. They leave it to you guys to look into what is the physical deficit and how the government is going to counter what is happening inside the world, around the world. But I think the government will be very, very hard pressed. And remember, this is not the only election. There's election in Bihar. And this time, this is the third tenure of the government, and third term is the only time when the government is in minority. It's not in a majority of its own. So there are various considerations, pulls and pressures, political pulls and pressures will play. Let's see what Andhra Pradesh gets, because the government is dependent on Andhra Pradesh. Let's see what Bihar gets, because the government is not only dependent on JDU, but the government also knows there's the election round the corner. And they have to win both elections to make sure, to tell the people that 2024 was aberration and not the norm.
Right, we were hoping that for the first budget of the third term of Modi, and the fact that there's hopes that since there's no political pressure, that the central elections are done with, this budget can be all about economics. So Yuvika, you seem to be smiling as I say that. Clearly, there is never economics without the pressure of politics, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are two facets of the same coin. But having said so, I would slightly differ, and I would think that this year there are only just two elections, right? So Delhi and Bihar are the only two state elections that we are looking at. And honestly, Delhi is just around the corner, and the Bihar election is towards the fag end of the year. So I would, and this budget honestly comes on the heels of a Lok Sabha win for the government, and I think the pressure to be populist in some sense is somewhat subdued this time around. So I think that gives the government the window to prioritize what is required on the economic front, like I said, to get growth going and to ensure that growth stabilizes. So there are already decelerating factors within the growth lever. So as we spoke about, urban consumption is on a slower pedal. The private consumption, the private capex cycle doesn't seem to be turning around in a hurry. And the government support to capex also so far, though we had numbers for December and it does seem that there is a turnaround, but through the first 3 quarters of this fiscal year, the support from the government capex was almost minimal. So given this environment, the government really needs to focus on where it matters the most, and that is where the economics does bring in and should be given a greater weight as far as in comparison to politics is concerned. Obviously, it's like I said, it's a balancing act. But nevertheless, I think the weight should be accorded more to economics, because that is where the priority lies, not just from a domestic perspective, but also from an global economics perspective. There is too much of hostility in the global environment at this point in time with Trump coming to power. We don't know the way the global trade and economic landscape will shape up over the course of the next few quarters. And I think it will be very, very interesting to see how the budget preps also for that. So they will have to keep the economic realities in mind, not just from a domestic perspective, but also be prepared in case the global situation was to deteriorate much more than anticipated. From a fiscal perspective, they'll have to keep the fiscal powder dry to step in case it is required from a global perspective.
All right, and staying on with the economics of how it's panning out in the last, at least the first half of this financial year, Yuvika, Economic Survey points to some very interesting figure. It says while the services sector expanded at about 7.2%, industrial growth was at about 6%, and manufacturing has been a laggard. Now, we do know that we are going to prepare for what's to come ahead, and which is what the budget is expected to do. How will one find a balance between services and manufacturing, and what should be the focus in your assessment going forward? Should government continue to press for manufacturing or actually bank on its strength, which is services?
I think it has to be a prudent mix of both. You can't just say that we'll bank only on services and not push forward manufacturing. And we know that globally, while manufacturing has been on a somewhat slower turf, we talk about AI, we talk about jobs being taken away. But also, having said that, I think there is merit in pushing manufacturing, because at the end of the day, manufacturing is the one which creates mass employment in the country. Services still tends to be much more niche. The job employment or the employment capability of the services sector remains somewhat more subdued in comparison to the manufacturing sector. So if we want to create large-scale jobs, we need to focus on manufacturing. And I think the economic survey also talks about that from that field, and it makes a very refreshing and a very honest feedback and a takeaway from what happens in the manufacturing sector, that there is excessive amount of regulation. And that is where I think, we typically do talk about it when we meet corporates or we meet investors. We do talk about how the ease of doing business, while we have made, we have taken strides as far as easing the way we do business is concerned, but there's still scope for further improvement. And I think that is where the focus of the government should be. If we want to push forward manufacturing with the viewpoint that we want to push forward gainful job creation in the economy, create an impetus for improvement in incomes and thereby consumption, so it's a vicious cycle, they will have to focus on manufacturing, and that brings with it the act of deregulating the industrial sector, pushing forward ease of doing business, ensuring that the entire tax regime is simplified, especially on the GST front. We have seen 5 years of GST now. The tax revenues are somewhere plateauing. There is merit in further rationalization of tax rates, simplification of the entire tax regime. And I think these are some of the steps that the government needs to put out in the budget as well. And in addition to this, support to the small and the medium enterprises, the ones which were the worst hit during the pandemic, still probably not back on their feet, and they continue to be the backbone of our manufacturing sector. So I think all these facets need some acknowledgement and some action in the budget, and I think that is what will be important.
All right. And on that, Yuvika, well, thank you very much for taking time out. I know you have to go at this point, but something very interesting Yuvika was alluding to, Shri, and that is what happens, one has to find a balance. What happens if things go awry further, starting 1st of Feb, which is when we know the tariffs have now kicked in, 25% tariffs on Canada have now kicked in. What really happens going forward if we don't find that balance? I also want to bring your views to our viewers right now on the fact that demand has been slower in the past, at least first half of this fiscal year, which essentially means even if we are manufacturing to the best of our capacity right now, if there is weaker demand, one cannot do much because this is not something that budget can really control.
Yeah, so if there's weaker demand, we won't be manufacturing to our full capacity because there's no company on earth which will make products which it doesn't, think it can sell. So that will remain a challenge. I think the fine line for the finance minister walk today is to ensure that how do we at least remain on this glide path of 6.3, 6.4% projection which they made for the GDP for this new financial year, and we also meet our fiscal deficit target, which from 4.9 we're now talking about 4.6, potentially going down to 4.4, then maybe eventually below 4 as well. So I think that's a trajectory in which we need to go. So this is not going to be an easy, balancing act. And as you said, a lot is also going to depend on how the external scenario plays out. What happens to the currency? What happens to some of our, merchandise exports and also potentially service exports, which is IT. So it's a whole lot of variables that the finance minister is dealing with.
Right.
And I think it's in some sense also unfair and unrealistic to expect that one budget will have the answer to all these problems. These are very complex geopolitical issues and domestic problems that we're dealing with. And I frankly, my panelists can also correct me, but I don't think there's any other country on planet where a budget, which is essentially a statement of government's account, becomes such an important policy kind of a thing. And there's so much pressure on the finance minister to go out and create magic in one day. What we've not done 364 days, rest of the days of the year.
Today's the day.
Yeah, that's a fair point. You never really almost hear about, let's talk about the US budget or let's talk about the UK budget. These don't become huge televised events, but in India it continues to be as well. Barnik, I just want to bring the focus on one particular thing, and that is the MSME sector. Everything from boosting the economy to boosting jobs in the economy, the MSME sector is going to play a crucial role. And definitely, if the big private companies are not stepping up their investments and creating jobs, it is the MSMEs that the government has turned to. In the economic survey, incidentally, it was noted that the loan growth to MSMEs was at a healthy level. It was in double digits. So, possibly they could be propped up as the so-called magic bullet to all that's ailing us.
Yeah, I think let's be clear, there are no magic bullets. But let me just respond also to Shweta's point on the entire consumption and manufacturing conundrum. I think there's a fairly easy way out of it, right? If you can build a globally competitive manufacturing industry, you do not need to be dependent only on domestic consumption. Note and point, we've done it in India already. If you look at the automotive sector and the automotive component sector, because we've built global capabilities, that sector actually exports a healthy percentage. Auto components nearly 60%, or automotive nearly 30%. And if you can be competitive, then actually tariffs work to your advantage.
Right.
I think the challenge for MSME is similar, right? It's not about credit or credit access. It's about fundamental quality and it's about competitiveness. I think we have to get to a place where Indian manufacturing, whether in smaller units or larger units, is competitive. And again, while we can try to compete against China. Let's also try to learn from China. One of the biggest strengths China has brought to bear over the last 3 decades is the fundamental manufacturing productivity, which is the unit per person who's sitting on the shop floor delivering, is tremendous. I have looked at assembly units where in India I've heard, even if you're doing phone assembly, it could range between 30 to 50, if not 60 phones a shift. In China, there are units where workers can do 200 to 250 phones a shift. So there's a paradigm difference between the productivity of a worker in India versus the productivity of a worker in China. And unless we fix these fundamental issues of productivity and competitiveness, no sector, big or large, in manufacturing can compete. So credit growth is a good start, but we have to address far greater structural issues for them to step up and deliver for the economy.
Absolutely, and structural issues is what Finance Minister will also have to address going forward. Let's quickly get Gaurang back into this conversation. Gaurang, I think there is absolutely no way out of this conundrum unless, of course, we make exports more competitive, and that is what the government should be focusing on.
Well, Shweta, before commenting on that, I was listening into the political and the election aspect. So, on a lighter note, I think one nation, one election is overdue then in that case. Because we have elections all year around the corner in our country, either Gram Panchayat or a municipal or a state, whatever be it. But yeah, I mean, my sense is that, and I agree with one of the comments made by my co-panelists, is that you can't expect the heaven and the star and the moon from the Honorable Finance Minister in one budget. And I am also of that opinion that budget is not the only platform wherein government can make policy changes or make new policies. We've seen that in the past, that post-budget, government has also stepped on the pedal and made certain policies. For example, PLI. I think it covers almost about 12 or 13 sectors. And as we go forward, I think there'll be more sectors to come in. My sense is that job creation is going to be an integral part of this particular budget. Whether it is going to be manufacturing or services, that's a debatable point. But manufacturing activities needs a strong focus. And, I will again say that what I've said in my opening remarks, that if not all, but let's hope that crucial and important aspects which the nation requires as far as pushing consumption and taking the GDP growth to the next level is concerned, is met with.
All right, that's the view coming in as far as budget is concerned. It's not a magic bullet, cannot be one. But, since we are talking about manufacturing and we are talking about consumption in the country, let's also talk about literally what drives consumption and who drives this consumption. It's India's middle class, the size of which is currently 570 million people. 38% of the total population share, Krishna, is the middle class.
Still somehow not considered a vote bank, despite that. I don't know, I have no idea how that's happening in this country. At 38% we have middle class, and they're never considered as a vote bank.
And their household income annually, as we were referring to, is about 6 to 36 lakh rupees. That is the middle class, whose share of consumption is literally 50%. And what are they consuming? Let's talk about some of those non-discretionary spends. And I want to focus first on auto, Barnik, because that's what you mentioned. Now, as far as auto is concerned, we have seen a slump when it comes to every other automobile apart from SUVs, growing at about 7.5%. What does it really tell you? It tells you that while the rich are getting more richer, affluent class can afford more SUVs, the sales of hatchback and sedans are on a downward trajectory. Essentially, people who are buying their first time cars or people who are hoping to buy a small car don't have enough money, but people who want to upgrade to an SUV have enough and more.
To the point where there are no small cars being launched anymore. Every launch that you see is either a minimum mini SUV to a large size SUV.
So I think this exactly happens to economies like India, where people who are rich or people who are in the top 100 million, and even if you look at the 570 million, probably another 50 million or 100 million from that, are not really affected by structural measures happening in the economy, because they have wealth diversification, they have multiple sources of wealth, and they can tomorrow pack their bags and move to Singapore and Dubai if they don't like what's going on in India, right? Which, by the way, is a growing trend amongst the affluent. I think the SUVs is a good move, because at least it means that some of the affluent class money is being spent in India. But I think the auto sector is always a good lead indicator of consumption. If the affordable car segment is not growing, it suggests that at the middle of your middle class and below, there's a genuine consumption crisis. And the crisis has to do with not only money in hand, but the future expectation of wage growth and inflation. If you look at wage growth, right, a 3 to 4% wage growth is nearly half of inflation, right? We've only brought inflation down to 4%.
So salaries are not even matching
no,
up.
Salaries are not matching. So if you look at
money is shrinking on the
money is shrinking, plus there is taxes, plus there is GST, right? The effective tax rate on the middle class in India is more than 50% if you put all of this together. So in that environment, I think the auto sector again is a good bellwether of the economy. I think the reason why auto companies are still doing well is because they have the global competitiveness to tap into global markets, right? But again, the consumption crisis is seen. We've been talking about a rural consumption crisis for the last 2-3 years. I think for the first time you're seeing an urban consumption crisis. That's why FMCG companies are crying hoarse. So again,
and which is interesting because if you further get into this data, you'll realize the sales of two-wheelers is doing better than the sales of four-wheelers, essentially meaning that perhaps rural India is still getting better while urban poor, the size of which is increasing.
But very interestingly, Shweta, if you look at one of RBI's big concerns, that's on the front of unsecured loans. If you look at the default that's happening in unsecured loans, it accounts for almost 52% of the new additions to banking NPA. So that tells you a story. So people who are taking these loans, they're not able to pay back. They're living beyond their means. So it's a very interesting situation where on the one hand we see the urban consumption is softening. It's largely because of this factors like this that people who are like borrowing just to maybe buy a fancy mobile phone or spend on, let's say, consumption, clothes, whatever. Now RBI has told banks not to encourage this.
Absolutely.
So there's a crackdown happening. So that is also another factor that will play out in the urban consumption story.
And very interestingly, a lot of people are also taking loans to buy smartphones. And
exactly.
Data,
that's a very big,
let's bring in that data onto our screens right now. If you look at the sales of smartphones, the premiumization in the market, I mean, staggering at about 41% as of 2023, gone up to 44%. So people who are buying premium phones, and by the way, very conservative estimate there, 15,000 rupees and more, that figure as of 2024 is 44%. What has really shrunk? There are a number of people who are buying entry-level phones, which is 10,000 rupees and more. What does it really tell you?
It tells you that aspirations are outstripping income. Very simple. I want to have the best phone, but I actually don't have the source of income to buy, let's say, an iPhone which costs me 1 lakh or 70,000 rupees. That's why I go and borrow from a bank and then I end up defaulting.
And the same sentiment is also reflected across FMCG.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk about FMCG. FMCG is fast-moving consumer goods, and this is definitely one of the fastest-moving consumer goods in the market possible. Let's take a look at other white goods as well. Look at refrigerators, and the story repeats itself. It's the premium, and there are two economies that function simultaneously. Anything that's premium and above premium, it continues to sell and sell and sell more. But anything which is not premium, there's a clear shrinkage in terms of its sales, and that's as far as be it smartphones
so
or
I think
refrigerators.
Banik addressed that point when he talked about how for the affluent India, that's really not an issue.
Right.
There's a premiumization of the market that's happening. Like those who can afford want to buy the best of what's available, whereas those who are at the bottom of the pyramid are not able to afford. They're not even able to afford the basic stuff. They're defaulting. They are wanting to consume, but they're defaulting. So that's a paradox that we're dealing with.
All right.
We also have data on the FMCG as well, isn't it?
FMCG, affordable housing, we'll come to that in just a bit. But look at the FMCG story there. September of 22, September 23, September 24. Value growth is shrinking massively. What's really happening is also that more and more people are now going for goods which are non-labeled. Which is especially emerging from the rural, sectors and rural economy.